Hey everyone, welcome back. Chapters 831 through 840 of the previous episode. Chen Ping'an travels along the paths of malicious Ghost Valley, actively seeking natural treasures on Treasure Mirror Mountain, while avoiding unhelpful entities like the old fox from West Mountain. He carefully examines the limpid, hazardous soul restraining stream for water element immortal treasures and meets Yang Chongxian. Recognizing the immense risk involved and the true nature of the stream, he makes a calculated decision to attempt to seek the fated opportunity anyway, resolving to change his past habit of always assuming he would not enjoy good fortune. If possible, you can support me via PayPal or become a channel member to help me keep this channel running. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. Chapter 841. The White Jade Plaza in front of the residence of Meticulous Skin City's city lord was smooth and mirror-like. A little girl stood there with her fists clenched in front of her chest, her face scrunched up and her lips puckered as she looked at the severely damaged chariot. She wanted to cry, but no tears were forthcoming. She had suffered a huge loss. After fleeing from deadly danger 2 times, City Lord Fan Yunluo didn't feel happy or fortunate at all. Instead, she only felt pain in her heart. She had accepted her loss the first time, since being defeated by a more skillful foe was a common occurrence in malicious Ghost Valley. Indeed, there were some city lords who had enjoyed resplendent fame in the past, yet these individuals were now faring even worse than her. They were lowly lackeys of White Cage City, Incense Shrine City, and the other cities, and they were living a life even inferior to chickens and dogs. Chickens and dogs could at least cluck at people and bark at passers-by. But would these individuals who had once been city lords dare to make any noise at their masters? The second time, however, Fan Yunluo had lost in a seemingly calm and nonchalant manner. There hadn't been any bloodshed or sanguine aura. Yet, it was this loss that made Fan Yunluo feel the most troubled and agonized. She now owed a favor to the well-renowned White Skeleton Sword Immortal of malicious Ghost Valley, and favors owed to him always had to be repaid. There was never an exception. Fan Yunluo sniffed and wiped her face, walking in a circle around her precious chariot and touching it here and stroking it there. She felt extremely pained. It would cost quite some lesser heat coins to fully repair the chariot in malicious Ghost Valley. But just how difficult would this be if she didn't sacrifice some of her current assets to earn some new immortal coins? Fan Yunluo suddenly banged her forehead into the chariot with a loud clang. She then started to wail hysterically at the top of her lungs. The old woman who had fortunately survived and made it back to the city felt increasingly anxious and lacking in confidence. She and the female officials of Meticulous Skin City had fled in all directions at Crow Peak just then, and some who were unlucky had suffered even further, being kidnapped by that golden courtier ghost and his subordinates. The old woman had managed to hide quickly, and she had even found and brought together a few female officials of Meticulous Skin City, somewhat rectifying her previous mistake to a small degree. Upon seeing the city lord's current state, however, the old woman immediately started to feel a little worried. By the looks of it, the city lord intended to use her personal wealth to repair this precious chariot? The old woman started to have thoughts about defecting to another city. In malicious Ghost Valley, big fish would eat small fish would eat small shrimp, and the lowliest small shrimps could only eat dirt. Once a city lord started to lose their generals, the consequences would often be unimaginable. It was very likely that their territory would be coveted by the nearby forces. Thus, once a few forces formed an alliance in secret and charged over with ferocity, it was inevitable that Meticulous Skin City would suffer the fate of being shattered and conquered by the attacking forces. When it came to doing battle here, the biggest taboo was failing to resist for long enough or having to make huge sacrifices to kill enemy soldiers. This was because larger forces in the surroundings would always be looking for opportunities to take advantage of, attacking those who were already weakened. If two sides fought tooth and nail, yet were both defeated and conquered by a more powerful force in the end, then what would they have been struggling for in the first place? Of course, the city lords of malicious Ghost Valley would often pore over the details and consider all the benefits and downfalls before making a move, and after locking onto their prey, they would usually take them down in a single blow, and face no nasty surprises. Even though Fan Yunluo was a golden core tier cultivator, Meticulous Skin City still appeared isolated and weak. As such, Fan Yunluo was a huge fan of playing mind games, and she would conceal some of the truth as she revealed to the others that she had a relatively good relationship with the Flax Robe sect. In fact, she even claimed that she had recognized a direct disciple from the ancestral hall of the Flax Robe sect's Green Cottage town as a half-brother. However, the old woman was well aware of the truth. All of these claims were absolute rubbish. If the cultivator from the ancestral hall of Green Cottage town were willing to nod and agree, Fan Yunluo would be willing to even recognize him as her father or old ancestor, to say nothing of recognizing him as a half-brother of equal standing. Thankfully, this cultivator was fully focused on cultivating Tao, and didn't concern himself with mortal matters. As a member of the Flax Robe sect, he was similar to Mural City's Yang Lin in the sense that they were both prodigious talents with huge chances of attaining Tao. Because of this, he didn't have the time or effort to care about Meticulous Skin City's underhanded techniques. Meticulous Skin City was one of the weakest forces in the southern region of Meticulous Skin City, and the group of female ghosts that Fan Yunluo had brought to Crow Peak were all ghosts whom she trusted and were good at fighting. Following the death and kidnapping of many of them, it could be said that this was truly a huge blow to the foundation of Meticulous Skin City. Lady Bai had suffered severe wounds, and it would take her at least 60 years and up to 100 years to make a full recovery. Losing some of her combat power wouldn't be a huge issue, especially since Lady Bai's strength wasn't related to her combat power. However, she was the lover of Pink Gentleman City's city lord who was being secretly raised outside. And this was actually an open secret that everyone in the southern region of Malicious Ghost Valley was aware of. Meanwhile, the city lord's proper wife was not only his wife, but she was also his Tao partner and the one who truly managed the affairs of the city. As a result, Pink Gentleman City had always had a huge bone to pick with Meticulous Skin City thanks to Lady Bai's existence. There was a cloudy expression on the old woman's face as she lowered her head slightly. She considered going all out and defecting to the lady in Pink Gentleman City, so she should perhaps steal the core immortal tool of Meticulous Skin City's city protection formation? Once Pink Gentleman City conquered Meticulous Skin City, perhaps it would even be possible for her to become the next city lord of Meticulous Skin City? There were a total of 36 cities of varying sizes in the north and south of Malicious Ghost Valley, and it had always been the case that the city lords would change while the cities would always remain the same. Whenever an old city lord was displaced, the new city lord would simply change the name of the city based on their own tastes. This was an unwritten rule of Malicious Ghost Valley, and it was said to have been started by Skeleton Wall City. When attacking other cities and engaging in all-out wars, the victor was allowed to massacre the loser and torture, and abuse them however they wanted. However, they were prohibited from severely damaging the defeated city and turning it into rubble. Of course, this was unless they had the resources and power to rebuild the city within 10 years. Otherwise, once the 10-year time limit was up, several Earth Immortal Ghost Generals of Skeleton Wall City would march south with an army to cause true unrest. The old woman felt extremely hesitant. Even though she felt more inclined to betray Meticulous Skin City and the pathetic Fan Yunluo, she couldn't help but feel slightly troubled. After all, engaging in such filthy acts of betraying one's master to seek glory elsewhere was still frowned upon in Malicious Ghost Valley. Even if she served another city lord, she would still be suppressed and targeted by the meritorious officials of the city. Her only hope was that Pink Gentleman City's true leader was also a woman, so as fellow women, perhaps this powerful ruler wouldn't care so much about her swaying loyalty. Fan Yunluo suddenly stopped her crazy behavior, turning to the old woman and saying with a pitiful expression, "After I was rescued by City Lord Pu Rang of White Cage City, he said that our tribute this year and next time both need to be doubled. What should we do, Granny Chong? With our measly number of defeated soldiers, how can Meticulous Skin City find immortal tools that are valuable enough to satisfy White Cage City's standards?" The old woman's heart shuddered and she replied with a smile, "City Lord, this is a silver lining. A rare fortune amid all our misfortunes. Since Great City Lord Pu has spoken, Meticulous Skin City won't need to worry about being coveted by those ill-intentioned forces for at least the next 100 years. Fan Yunluo's childish face remained gloomy as she said, "But Meticulous Skin City is spending more than we earn, and we need to give away all of our wealth every time we pay tribute. Even if we struggle hard and forcefully hang in there for 100 years, we'll still suffer the same fate after that. We're doing nothing but delaying the inevitable." The old woman could only squeeze out a smile and say in consolation, "There's no need to be so pessimistic, City Lord. 100 years isn't a long time, but it isn't a short time either. Every dog has its day, so if we manage to enjoy good fortune once or twice, perhaps Meticulous Skin City can undergo a significant transformation and become the strongest city in the southern region of Malicious Ghost Valley. At that time, even City Lord Pooh might need to rely on City Lord Fan, to say nothing of Incense Shrine City and Pink Gentleman City." Fan Yunluo nodded in response. She extended a finger and scratched the corner of her eye like a kitten scratching its cheek, and she asked in puzzlement, "I'm feeling so heartbroken right now, so why am I not shedding a few tears? This is quite unreasonable." The old woman was rendered speechless. Fan Yunluo waved her hand and summoned the gigantic chariot into her large sleeve. She then walked toward her residence and hollered, "I'm going to stab a voodoo doll now. I'm going to stab that bastard wearing a bamboo hat to death." The old woman's mind whirred as she walked behind Fan Yunluo. Was City Lord Fan saying this as a warning to her? Or was this nothing more than a casual remark? Fan Yunluo didn't stop as she suddenly turned around and asked, "Oh, that's right. What was that person's name again?" "I don't think he ever mentioned his name," the old woman replied with an awkward expression. Fan Yunluo stopped in her tracks, a dumbfounded look on her face. She suddenly swung her sleeves around and chaotically stomped her feet, wailing in grief, "I can't even make a voodoo doll and stab it anymore, the thing that I'm most skilled at." The old woman felt utterly helpless. Fan Yunluo's room in the City Lord's residence was piled high with voodoo dolls. Yet when had they ever been effective? Had they been effective even once? Fan Yunluo was short and petite to begin with, yet her dress was long and loose-fitting in contrast. As a result, she looked much like a radish that could walk. Over at the deep mountain stream flowing through Treasure Mirror Mountain, Chan Ping'an attempted many different methods after deciding to have a go at obtaining the fated opportunity of the mountain stream. For example, he retrieved the fishing rod that he had obtained from Bamboo Scroll Lake's Purple Bamboo Island, and he wouldn't dare to observe the stream for too long after identifying a certain item that he wanted to fish for. Chan Ping'an would hold his breath and focus his attention before casting his line, attempting to either fish up some crystalline skeleton or some damaged immortal tool that was shimmering with a faint golden glow. After trying a few times, however, Chan Ping'an was surprised to discover that the scenes at the bottom of the stream were seemingly nothing more than illusions. There would be nothing on his fishing hook each time he reeled the line back in. Even so, Chan Ping'an was still unwilling to give up, and he tried several more methods, one after another. However, he was ultimately unable to retrieve a single item from the bottom of the stream, and he felt was possibly because of the spiritual energy formed in the stream transforming into something similar to a mountain and water barrier. In the end, Chan Ping'an even retrieved a yellow paper barrier-shattering talisman, attempting to use this to open up a path. He rapidly tossed the talisman into the stream, after which he cast a line and had it follow the small path created by the talisman. However, the talisman combusted extremely quickly in the stream water that was brimming with yin energy, so Chan Ping'an was once again left empty-handed. Chan Ping'an squatted down beside the stream, feeling slightly pained about the barrier-shattering talisman that he had just wasted. Lying on the snow-white stone cliff on the opposite side of the mountain stream, Yang Chongxian smiled and said, "To say nothing of your flashy and opportune methods, just how many Earth Immortals have summoned and used all of their immortal treasures throughout history? In fact, there was even a cultivator who used an exorbitantly expensive drinking bottle, exhausting their spiritual energy and channeling a mystical ability to suck up a huge amount of water from the stream. The water in the bottle was enough to drown a large city of a mortal empire. However, the cultivator still failed to retrieve a single item from this stream, making a huge loss as a result. Do you know the reason why? Please enlighten me, fellow cultivator Yang," Chan Ping'an said with a smile. When traveling around in the outside world, referring to other people as fellow cultivator was the safest option and least likely to cause any offense. Yang Chongxian placed his hands behind his head, using them as a pillow as he basked in the sun and looked up at the sky with squinted eyes. Many mountains like to have beautiful female cultivators use enchanted picture scrolls as a means to make money, he explained slowly. When male cultivators observe the bowl of water before them, what they see is a beautiful and amorous celestial maiden right before their eyes, so close that they can seemingly reach forward and touch her. But what's the true distance between them? And just how long is your fishing line? Is it tens of thousands of kilometers long? Chen Ping'an came to a sudden realization and he remarked, "So that's how it is. It looks like I've been trying in vain." When it comes to mystical treasures in the world, only those that have just appeared in the world might potentially be regarded as treasures that can be obtained by whoever comes across them first, Yang Chongxian continued. As for Treasure Mirror Mountain, it has already existed for thousands of years and been visited by countless cultivators, so how can the fated opportunity here be that easy to obtain unless one has some good fortune? I've stayed here for several years already, and aren't I just waiting bitterly as well? So you don't need to feel embarrassed about your failed attempts. I tried even more laughable methods in the past, and I directly jumped into the stream in an attempt to scour the bottom. However, diving down was easy, but swimming back up was a huge struggle, taking me an entire month. I almost drowned in the process. Such impressive cultivation base and abilities, fellow cultivator Yang. Chen Ping'an praised sincerely. Yang Chongxian sighed and said, "It's a so-so." The city lord of Skeleton Wall City was said to have entered the stream and explored it for an entire year. Yet even he failed to find the golden hairpin that can open the door to the treasure mirror. Even though the city lord is a Yin entity, giving him a huge advantage, I still wouldn't be able to stay in the stream for a year, even if I were to die and become a ghost. This stream water is filled with abundant Yin energy, so if one finds a suitable customer outside Malicious Ghost Valley, perhaps a few liters of stream water can sell for a few snowflake coins. The cultivator who used a drinking bottle managed to suck up a huge amount of stream water back then, so how come he didn't sell the stream water and make a huge profit? How did he make a huge loss instead? Chen Ping'an asked in curiosity. Yang Chongxian smiled and replied, "The Yin energy of the stream water will disperse extremely quickly once the water is taken outside Treasure Mirror Mountain. Moreover, unless one stores the water in a minimization treasure or pocket treasure, it will become like flood water breaking through a dam wall once it's brought outside Treasure Mirror Mountain." The upper 5-tier cultivator from back then became careless one time, and he retrieved the drinking bottle immortal treasure from his minimization treasure when he arrived at Skeleton Shoal. However, the drinking bottle was filled with too much stream water, and it was unable to withstand the surging current of Yin energy, so it ended up exploding on the spot. The cultivator was fortunately at Skeleton Shoal, and not too far from the swaying river, allowing him to control the situation. Otherwise, if this had happened elsewhere, the sages of the Confucian academies would have perhaps held him accountable for the inevitable calamity. Yang Chongxian smiled and continued, 5 liters of unprocessed water from the mountain stream can easily be sold for 1 snowflake coin at Skeleton Shoal, with the condition being that you have a minimization treasure or pocket treasure to store the stream water first. In addition, you'll also need 1 or 2 immortal treasures like that upper 5-tier cultivator's drinking bottle. The grade of this treasure shouldn't be too high, or else it will cause too much trouble and be prone to causing failed deals. However, its grade shouldn't be too low either, or else it will take up more space than it's worth. In any case, those under the level of Earth Immortal don't dare to venture here to collect stream water, while those who are Earth Immortals couldn't care less about earning a few snowflake coins. Hearing this, Chen Ping'an grabbed his sword nurturing gourd and placed it in the stream, filling it to the brim with stream water. He was a half-assed chi refiner who had opened up his water palace already, and he had thought about replenishing the water there when spending some money to drink gloomy tea at the stall on the bank of Swaying River a short while back. If he were able to collect a gourd full of water from this mountain stream, then it could be said that he had roughly broken even on this trip to Treasure Mirror Mountain. In fact, Chen Ping'an could indeed make another trip to Treasure Mirror Mountain before leaving Malicious Ghost Valley. He didn't need to dream about obtaining a drinking bottle immortal treasure, but he could indeed prepare some extra bottles and jars, allowing him to collect a few 100 liters of stream water. When he returned to Skeleton Shoal afterward, he could visit the tea stall again and see whether he could strike a deal with the stall owner. Success would mean a healthy sum of snowflake coins. Yang Chongxian simply glanced at the vermilion wine gourd in Chen Ping'an's hand. He felt slightly surprised, but he didn't think too much of it. "Thank you for the information, fellow cultivator Yang." Chen Ping'an stood up and cupped his fists, saying, "Since I'm destined to obtain no fated opportunity at Treasure Mirror Mountain, it's time for me to take my leave now. Farewell." fellow cultivator Yang. Yang Chongxian sat up, appearing very surprised as he asked, "You're leaving just like that?" Chen Ping'an nodded in response as he put on his bamboo hat. Yang Chongxian lay back down, closing his eyes and resting his mind. However, only a short moment passed before he opened his eyes again, asking, "Are you truly leaving? Should I think of you as decisive, or should I regard you as having no patience?" Chen Ping'an had clearly used a pocket treasure when retrieving and putting away his bamboo fishing rod just then, and he hadn't attempted to hide this fact at all. This was similar to how Yang Chongxian had openly stuck his feet inside the stream just then, a small act of expressing friendliness. In the northern complete reed continent, one needed to understand how to subtly display one's abilities if one wanted to avoid unnecessary fights. Otherwise, there would be many ants who had few abilities but a big temper. Even if one were to crush these ants underfoot, they would still continue to shout and curse until their last breath, sending their spittle flying everywhere and refusing to change their ways even in the face of death. However, killing people couldn't be treated as eating rice, and after experiencing such scenarios too many times, Yang Chongxian started to feel increasingly annoyed and disinterested. Because of this, his temperament gradually changed, and he slowly became more and more friendly. For example, the past him would have killed that foul-mouthed old fox from West Mountain 80 times over if not 100 times over. Yang Chongshuan's mood improved slightly after the young wanderer wearing the bamboo hat left Treasure Mirror Mountain. The young man had said something that truly spoke to his heart. It would be a better choice to avoid potential trouble. These words rang especially true since Yang Chongxian was now at a critical stage of obtaining his fated opportunity. He sat up and narrowed his eyes, staring intently at the deep mountain stream. It was as if his gaze could pierce through the water. Regarding this treasure mirror, the speculation in the Be at Ease compilation was incorrect. It wasn't a radiant mirror or whatnot, and it definitely wasn't a paramount demon-exposing mirror used to target demons and ghosts. Rather, it was the 3 Mountains and 9 Lords mirror that had already been lost for a very long time. This was a pseudo-celestial tool. Chen Ping'an had already ventured far away from Treasure Mirror Mountain. In reality, Chen Ping'an had strayed significantly from the path leading to Green Cottage Town in order to make his trip to Treasure Mirror Mountain. Judging from the result, however, it seemed like trying to get lucky was indeed not very suitable for him. In contrast, things might have been very different if it were Lu Tai or Li Huai visiting Treasure Mirror Mountain instead. Just like before, Chen Ping'an chose to traverse the tall and undulating peaks after he left Treasure Mirror Mountain, gradually making his way toward Green Cottage Town. The Golden Courtiering entity and his subordinates still didn't appear before Chen Ping'an, but this was very understandable when taking into account his battle at Crow Peak before. Chen Ping'an had gotten too into things and hadn't purposely concealed his strength, and the female officials led by the Golden Courtier City Lord Fan Yunluo of Meticulous Skin City had suffered a crushing defeat. As such, the so-called bandits that had roamed around malicious Ghost Valley for many years most likely wouldn't run over to ask for a beating. There were no obstructions as Chen Ping'an traveled north, and many ghosts and spirits that could potentially threaten the lives of middle 5-tier cultivators were extremely cautious, only taking a glance at him from a distance before retreating back to their dens in the mountain forest. On the other hand, if the pair of Dao partners were to come across the large python spirit and spider spirit on the broken suspension bridge, they would perhaps face life-threatening danger even if they simply stood there without actually crossing the bridge. Evening arrived, and Chen Ping'an decided to stop and rest inside a peach tree forest. There was naturally something strange about this peach tree forest. After all, how could peach blossoms remain in full bloom in the middle of winter? However, as Chen Ping'an traveled around malicious Ghost Valley to train, he wasn't afraid of things being peculiar or strange. Rather, he was afraid of things being too ordinary. Before setting foot into the peach tree forest, Chen Ping'an had seen 2 stone tablets erected outside, one tall and one short. They were like a pair of feuding neighbors, with one engraved with the characters, Great Round Moon Monastery, and the other engraved with the characters, Small Mystery Capital Temple. If it weren't for the character small before Mystery Capital Temple, Chen Ping'an wouldn't have dared to enter the peach tree forest no matter what. This was because the genuine Mystery Capital Temple was an important immortal region in the heavenly world that dared to oppose the rule of the 3 Taoist branch masters. It was said that after the Taoist's second disciple became a Taoist branch master, the only time that he had used his immortal sword in the heavenly world was when he was in the mystery capital temple. Even though Qian Ping'an confirmed that the small mystery capital temple engraved on the stone tablet was definitely not the Taoist sacred land well-renowned even in the majestic world, Qian Ping'an still soared into the sky on 1st and 15th before entering the peach tree forest, casting his gaze over the vast forest that covered at least 1,000 acres and making sure that there weren't any Taoist temples or abbeys. There was not a single word about this peach tree forest in the Be at Ease compilation. As such, one could presume that there shouldn't be any ferocious ghosts or great demons in the area. Qian Ping'an discovered that there was surprisingly not a single peach tree branch on the ground, and there was only the excessive shade overhead as well as the concentrated fragrance of the peach blossoms. In fact, the fragrance was so concentrated that it was no longer pleasant, and after smelling it for too long it even started to become sickening. Qian Ping'an took off his bamboo hat and sat down cross-legged, retrieving a Yang Energy Illumination talisman from his sleeve and gently rubbing it between two fingers, causing it to slowly combust. It combusted just as quickly as the talismans he had used on the winding path to Green Cottage Town, so by the looks of it, the Yang energy here was indeed very ordinary. It was just that the fragrance permeating throughout the peach tree forest was quite excessive. Qian Ping'an bent down and placed the talisman in front of himself, after which he started to practice standing meditation. He channeled his pure breath of true qi, causing it to swim through his acupoints like a fiery dragon. This allowed him to repel the concentrated fragrance and prevent it from entering his body, lest he fall victim to some unknown trap. The silvery laugh of a young woman traveled over from underground. Qian Ping'an paid no heed to this. The laughter stopped, transforming into a seductive voice that said, "Handsome young lad, you've entered my pink residence and enjoyed the fragrance of my hair. So if I were you, I would stay in this place forever and never leave. I would stay here for this lifetime and every lifetime." Qian Ping'an opened his eyes and focused his gaze, looking at the mist hovering 1 foot above the ground and swirling around. He was slightly surprised and he asked, "Why did the Flax Robe sect purposely leave you, a peach tree spirit, out of the Be at Ease compilation?" The entire peach tree forest started to gently sway back and forth, appearing much like a beautiful woman in a pink dress beginning to dance. It was as if the 1,000 acres of peach trees were truly nothing more than her hair. Qian Ping'an noticed that the scenery in his eyes was also starting to sway gently. The peach tree spirit was hiding at some unknown location underground, and she laughed softly as she replied in an enticing voice, "This is naturally because the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect are afraid of me. Why else could it be? Handsome young lad, you're very handsome, but you're also a bit too dim-witted. Otherwise, you would truly be an ideal and flawless partner." She suddenly stopped laughing after a moment, asking, How is your body able to remain calm? And how is your heart able to remain calm as well? Perhaps you're a Buddhist monk who hasn't shaved your hair? Perhaps you're a stinky Taoist priest who isn't wearing Taoist robes." Qian Ping'an smiled and replied, "I'll cut down all of the peach trees here if you continue to hide and play tricks. I'll treat this as sword training, and I'll turn you into a nun with no hair." The peach tree spirit didn't get angry, and she instead laughed and exclaimed in excitement, "Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm respectfully waiting for you to display your immortal sword techniques." Qian Ping'an looked up and gazed into the distance. A young Taoist priest holding a horsetail whisk dashed over using a land-shortening technique, his lips full and his teeth sparkling and the lively true qi flowing around his body unable to be concealed. He was surprisingly a powerful cultivator who was imminently about to become a golden core tier earth immortal. The young Taoist priest's eyes were cold as he glanced at Qian Ping'an and said, "This is where my master and his friend are cultivating in seclusion, and this has been the case for the past 1,000 years. This peach tree forest is widely recognized as an otherworldly paradise in malicious Ghost Valley, and it has always disliked being disturbed by outsiders. Even City Lord Pu Rang of White Cage City won't lightly enter the forest unless he has some important matter to discuss. Yet, as an outsider visiting malicious Ghost Valley to train, why are you facing off against this measly peach tree spirit? Make haste and leave." The peach tree spirit clearly respected and feared the young Taoist priest, but her mumbling voice carried a hint of resentment as she said, "Otherworldly paradise? You simply used an immortal mystical ability to forcefully restrain me to this place, so that I could protect that Taoist temple and Buddhist monastery and prevent their remnant spiritual energy from dispersing outward. There was anger on the young Taoist priest's face, and as he flicked his horsetail whisk, a bolt of lightning as thick as an arm surprisingly materialized in the air and thundered into the ground, causing the peach tree spirit hiding underground to wail in muffled agony. Peach blossoms rustled and drifted to the ground. Chen Ping'an gained a better understanding of the situation. There were definitely some powerful cultivators who were unafraid of the abundant yin energy, and had chosen to settle down and cultivate inside malicious Ghost Valley. They wanted to rely on the overwhelming amount of yin energy that filled every corner of heaven and earth to temper their cultivation. The young Taoist priest was still feeling angry, so he flicked his horsetail whisk again and sent a net-shaped arc of immortal lightning into the ground, instantly causing it to rumble loudly. You can't go 3 days without a beating, huh? If it isn't for my master's benevolence, how can a measly peach tree spirit like you, who only knows some illusion techniques, stay alive and maintain your status in malicious Ghost Valley? Not only that, but you're even eavesdropping on the Tao discussions between my master and his friend, and it's only thanks to this fated opportunity that you've managed to slowly cultivate to the Dragon Gate tier. You ungrateful spirit! The peach tree spirit was extremely pained, and it bitterly pleaded with the fierce young Taoist priest and begged him to show some mercy. However, the young Taoist priest became increasingly angry as he spoke, and he flicked his horsetail whisk once again and surprisingly summoned a peculiar phenomenon atop the sea of clouds in the sky. A bolt of secret heavenly lightning of the Taoist immortal force was just about to descend and teach that peach tree spirit a lesson. Chen Ping'an had no option but to speak up, saying, "Please calm down, young Taoist senior. I'll leave this peach tree forest straight away." A dark cloud left the sea of clouds, slowly bearing down and crackling with webs of astonishingly powerful lightning. The young Taoist priest chuckled coldly and said, "If it weren't for us cultivating in this peach tree forest, then you would have already had your yang energy sucked dry by this peach tree spirit who's innately skilled at illusion techniques and charm techniques after you accidentally set foot in the forest. Yet, foolish as you are, you're actually feeling pity for the peach tree spirit now?" Master was correct. Mortal beings like you who are bathing in the mortal world outside every single day. Chen Ping'an moved a foot back before rapidly throwing a punch at the sea of clouds, unleashing the rain evaporation technique to shatter the thundercloud that was gathering power in the sky. The dispersing energy swept chaotically into the surroundings, appearing much like ferocious mountain winds as it rushed through the peach tree forest and caused a rain of bright red peach blossoms to fall to the ground. The young Taoist priest frowned and fell silent. He wasn't afraid or anything, but he did feel slightly astonished. Such a young martial arts lesser grandmaster? His punch just then was concise and magnificent, and even though he wasn't at the Vajrabhati tier yet, it was clear that he wasn't far from reaching this level. However, it seemed as if the young Taoist priest had forgotten that he was also such a young Dragon Gate tier cultivator. He had advanced to the abode tier far too early, and his master had been describing to him the many mystical matters on the path of cultivation at the time, asking him whether he wanted to use the opportunity to maintain his current appearance. Naive and not knowing any better at the time, the young Taoist priest had felt like the physical body was nothing more than a sack of skin and flesh, so since maintaining his appearance wouldn't detrimentally affect his future cultivation, he had decided that locking it in wouldn't be a bad thing. In the following 60 years, however, the young Taoist priest started to kick himself with immense regret. He should have at least allowed his physical body to reach the 20s before he locked in his appearance. Because of this, he would feel extremely irritated whenever he came across Fan Yun Luo, who looked like a little girl, when he secretly snuck out to relax his mind. However, the old monk would rub salt in his wounds, teasing him and saying that he and Fan Yun Luo were truly like a golden boy and jade girl. After retracting his fist, Chen Ping'an smiled and said, "It's correct for you to speak reason, but if you genuinely want to speak reason for the sake of your audience accepting your words instead of merely trying to put yourself at ease, then your state of mind and tone will also be extremely important. Remaining calm and speaking in a more amicable manner won't hurt." The peach tree spirit that was almost scared out of her wits hurriedly concurred and said, Yes, this is a very reasonable assessment. You should listen to this and keep it in mind." Holding the snow-white horsetail whisk that had its handle made out of the bones of a heroic spirit in his arm, the young Taoist priest appeared very hesitant. Engaging in violent conflict because of a small disagreement was unbecoming of a cultivator from the small mystery capital temple. However, since this person was a martial artist who had come to malicious Ghost Valley to train, engaging in a sparring session with him wouldn't be wrong, would it? His master wouldn't reprimand him, right? A golden-armored warrior strode over at this moment, facing the young Taoist priest's back and saying in a solemn voice, "Su Song, the true lord has extended an invitation to this young master to enter the temple for a chat. What's so great about this person? Why is he allowed to enter our small mystery capital temple?" The young Taoist priest raged. The golden-armored warrior ignored the young Taoist priest's incandescent fury, and it had already turned to Chan Ping'an, who had just put on his bamboo hat and said, "Young master, the true lord has invited you inside, so if you're not in a hurry to leave, then you can visit the small mystery capital temple to enjoy a cup of 1,000-year-old peach syrup tea." Chan Ping'an cupped his fists in respect and politely turned down the invitation, saying, "I've already disturbed True Lord's cultivation by accidentally entering this peach tree forest, so I truly don't dare to visit the temple to disturb True Lord even more. I'll take my leave straight away." The golden-armored warrior nodded and replied, "If that's the case, then I won't insist any further. If you want to visit the temple to enjoy some tea in the future, feel free to instruct the peach tree spirit to lead the way." Chan Ping'an turned around and left the peach tree forest. The young Taoist priest called Su Song humped coldly and spat. "Good riddance. Him leaving will save us a cup of peach syrup tea that even Skeleton Pooh has only managed to enjoy 3 times. That's right, this person is completely blind and actually let slip such a huge fated opportunity. The next time he comes to the peach tree forest, I'll go into hiding and not let him find me," the peach tree spirit underground said obsequiously. "You dare to ignore master's instructions?" Su Song exclaimed in rage. The peach tree spirit immediately begged for forgiveness, saying, "I wouldn't dare to. Never in my life." Inside an old and refined Taoist temple that was covered in peach trees, a healthy-looking old Taoist priest was currently sitting opposite a wizened Buddhist monk. The old monk was nothing but skin and bones, yet he was wearing a surprisingly large and loose-fitting Buddhist robe. "How was his punch?" the old Taoist priest asked with a faint smile. "Extreme rigidity begets brittleness," the old monk replied slowly. The old Taoist priest glanced at a cup of tea on the table and asked, "Do you think we should leave this cup of peach syrup tea here? Do you think that young man will return to the peach tree forest and visit this temple to gulp down this tea?" "Excessive talk begets mistakes," the old monk said with no expression on his face. The old Taoist priest wasn't wearing his Taoist hat, and he only had an unfettered headpiece tied around his head and an old and ordinary Taoist robe on his body. He didn't possess an impressive immortal demeanor. He sighed softly and said, "The 3 female heavenly officials of Mural City had already left their murals and each chosen a master. An upper 5-tier cultivator from another continent has also barged into malicious Ghost Valley with He Xiaoyang, with the 2 of them traveling together to Skeleton Wall City. At the same time, Yang Chongxian is showing signs of being able to obtain that fated opportunity. If Pu Rang causes some commotion as well at this moment, causing Zhu Quan to personally lash out, then malicious Ghost Valley will truly enter a state of utter commotion. When that time comes, our last remaining otherworldly paradise might also lose its peaceful and tranquil nature." "Impressive foresight, true lord," the wizened old monk said with a nod. The old monk silently chanted Ba in his mind when he heard the mention of Pu Rang. The old Taoist priest had actually detected the fluctuation in the old monk's mind already, but there was no need to say anything since the 2 of them already knew everything about each other. The old Taoist priest gazed into the distance and said, "To cultivators like us, even the border between life and death is fuzzy, so what place in the world isn't a cage? The more oblivious we are, the more we feel at ease. But once we become knowledgeable, how can we truly feel at ease?" The old monk contemplated this for a moment before lowering his head and holding his hands together in a prayer, revealing his hands that were dry and shriveled yet covered in a golden yellow luster. "My Buddhist knowledge is not yet able to hold up my Buddhist robe. So how can I seek an audience with Buddha? How can I ask about this ancient dilemma?" He slowly stood up, his hands still held together in a prayer as he bowed in respect. The old Taoist priest didn't stick to those complicated sets of etiquette and formality when interacting with his old friend, so he simply nodded in acknowledgement. The old monk took a step forward and vanished into thin air, returning to the great round moon monastery. Just like the small mystery capital temple, this was also an immortal abode that formed its own small world in the peach tree forest. Unless one were at the nascent tier, one wouldn't be able to see or enter these immortal abodes even if one wandered around the peach tree forest for 1,000 years. There was the sound of Buddhist chants in the temple, and there was an old monk sitting still on a straw mat and several monks walking slowly with their heads lowered through the corridor. There were also young monks diligently sweeping the ground under the trees, with each monk busy with his own task. They didn't talk to each other as they worked. As the wizened old monk stood still and looked around, the many monks in the monastery were actually nothing but racks of white bones. After walking around the main hall that was filled with clouds and mists that concealed the golden statues of Buddha, the wizened old monk held his hands together in a prayer, his expression devout as he quietly walked forward. Several monks who looked similar in appearance to the wizened old monk yet were vastly different in age slowly materialized and gathered around him, someone who had almost reached a consummate level of the golden arhat. They were all wearing different Buddhist robes, and there were 40 of them in total, with each asking a different question as they appeared. However, the wizened old monk ignored their presence and paid no heed to their words as he continued to walk forward. A young monk said with an expression of pity, "Why didn't you drink that cup of peach syrup tea? Drinking it could have saved many years of cultivation. You would have taken one step closer to the Western Pure Land, and even half a step closer would have been better than nothing." A middle-aged monk was boiling with anger as he bellowed at the wizened old monk. "Just what kind of Buddhism are you cultivating? There are so many ghosts and spirits in malicious Ghost Valley. So why aren't you releasing any of them from their state of suffering?" A monk wearing an extravagant Buddhist robe had a haughty expression as he peered at the wizened old monk out of the corners of his eyes and scoffed. "This kind of ascetic cultivation is not the proper dharma." An elderly monk who appeared closest in age to the wizened old monk asked in a quiet voice, "You are me and I am you?" In the end, a young and slender monk stood with his back facing the wizened old monk who was slowly walking forward in a firm and resolute manner. The young monk looked toward a bamboo fence that was decorated with luxuriant peach blossoms and said in a daze, "Beautiful peach blossoms smiling through the fence, appearing most touching as they verge on blooming." 1. The wizened old monk paused slightly, but he quickly strode forward again before recovering his normal gait. If a mortal human entered this monastery and didn't look up, they would feel as if they were bathing in warm sunlight. If they looked up, however, they would see a crescent moon hanging above their heads. Inside the small mystery capital temple, the old Taoist priest walked over to a peach tree that towered into the clouds and squatted down, pinching up some soil and gently rubbing it between two fingers. The soil between his fingers was 10,000-year-old soil, something that many cultivators in the mountains dreamed of obtaining. This soil was as heavy as gold and iron. The old Taoist priest remained silent. In reality, the notion of age also applied to soil, and it could also be separated into the 4 stages of birth, old age, disease, and death. People in the world all like to use the saying immovable like the mountains. Yet this saying didn't necessarily hold true. At the end of the day, this saying was born from the fact that mortal humans had a limited lifespan and could only see things in a hazy manner. They couldn't see the true essence of things, nor could they see far into the future. Because of this, there was the Buddhist saying, "When Buddha looks at a bowl of water, what he sees is an innumerable amount of organisms." The wizened old monk of the Great Round Moon Monastery used this principle as the foundation of his Chan meditation, but what he observed was slightly bigger than a bowl of water. He was observing the moon instead. As for the old Taoist priest, he was observing something slightly closer than the moon. He was observing the gradual transformation of this lifeless soil over time. The Taoist temple and the Buddhist monastery were neighbors, and the two old cultivators had engaged in debates for more than 1,000 years already. However, they were still unable to settle on a victor. Right now, they were competing to see whether he would become a heavenly lord first or whether the old monk would become a bodhisattva first. The young Taoist priest, Su Song, trembled with fear as he walked to his master's side, and he kept silent and didn't dare to speak when he saw that his master was deep in thought. The old Taoist priest didn't turn around as he asked with a smile, "Not only were you unable to show off your might outside the temple, but you were even given a lecture by a young martial artist. What did you think about his words? Were they reasonable?" Holding the horsetail whisk in his arm, the young Taoist priest replied in low spirits, "What does it matter to me even if his words were reasonable?" The old Taoist priest nodded and tossed the soil away, using his smooth and jade-like palm to gently flatten the ground. He then stood up and said, "As the myriad beings with spirit and the countless humans with emotion gradually ascend to higher levels, they'll become increasingly aware of the ruthless nature of the great Tao. It wouldn't be a bad thing for you to learn from the Taoist priests of Mount Longhu, slaying demons and performing good deeds every day to accumulate merit and virtue. However, learning about the principles of apathy from me, and pursuing the truth while seeking Tao is even better." The old Taoist priest smiled and continued, "The principles of apathy don't teach you to act violently and wantonly, killing innocent people without batting an eyelid. Rather, it teaches you to observe the cycles of the 4 seasons, and the permanence of heaven and earth." The young Taoist priest solemnly bowed to his master. The old Taoist priest turned around and looked in the direction of the great round moon monastery, saying in a soft voice, "Desire, anger, ignorance, arrogance, and doubt. If one cultivates in earnest without eliminating these 5 poisons first, then one ultimately isn't cultivating the proper Dharma and attaining Chan meditation. Rather, one will be attaining sinister meditation." The old Taoist priest then turned his gaze to the area north of the peach tree forest, continuing, "Susong, if you're temporarily unable to comprehend the great Tao, then it wouldn't hurt for you to try another method and become a good person according to the standards of mortal people. However, it's important to keep in mind that entering the world to do good deeds is largely unrelated to the good and bad that you'll receive back from the world. This is a different path with the same destination, and this is also one aspect of the principles of apathy. The Tao also adheres to nature." However, the young Taoist priest shook his head and replied, "I can't become that kind of good person." The old Taoist priest didn't offer a response to this. "Master, does the genuine mystery capital temple also enjoy eternal spring and have ever-blooming peach blossoms like here?" the young Taoist priest asked carefully. The old Taoist priest smiled and replied, "If you want to know, then you shouldn't stay here in the majestic world. You should travel to the heavenly world ruled by the Taoist sect and personally discover the truth for yourself. If you truly have such intentions, then I'll instruct this peach tree spirit to leave with this mountain. After you leave Malicious Ghost Valley, you can first cultivate with that young sect leader with the surname He, and you can look for an opportunity to travel to the heavenly world after that. That way, you'll naturally have a better opportunity to visit the mystery capital temple." The young Taoist priest earnestly shook his head and exclaimed, "No, I won't go, I won't go. I'll cultivate wherever Master is cultivating." The old Taoist priest lightly smacked the young Taoist priest's head. The young Taoist priest smiled with squinted eyes. The old Taoist priest suddenly sighed with emotion and said, "I just remembered that it's already been a very long time since I last drank a bowl of gloomy tea from the swaying river. 1,000 years have passed already, so I surmise that the taste will only be richer and mellower." The twilight sky was dark and gloomy, and Changpingen was already quite close to Green Cottage Town. There were only 100 kilometers left as Changpingen walked past a dark green lake. When traversing across a mountain peak in the distance just then, Changpingen had seen the flickering flames of a campfire over here. He had hurriedly made his way over, thinking that if he came across a wandering Yin spirit, he could dispose of it and make some money from its skeleton. He hadn't engaged in much training yet on this trip to Malicious Ghost Valley, and he had only been involved in a single fight at Crow Peak before. Afterward, he had only thrown a single punch in the peach tree forest. On the other hand, he had already made quite a bit of money, to say nothing of the snow-white Tao robe from Meticulous Skin City's Lady Bai. He had also obtained a dozen or so sets of valuable skeletons. As for exactly how much these sets of crystalline white skeletons would sell for, this was quite difficult to say. Meanwhile, even though the stream water from Treasure Mirror Mountain wasn't especially valuable, it could at least save Changpingen from some small troubles. After drinking 1 liter of stream water in a single breath before, Changpingen had performed breathing techniques and calmed his mind, after which he had used an internal observation technique to enter his water palace. What he had seen was the green-robed children jumping in joy. What Changpingen saw near the lake was quite unexpected. There was a handsome young man dressed in dull gold robes being accompanied by 2 subordinates. By the looks of it, They were most likely planning to rest beside the lake for the night. Quickly calculating their speed and the routes in malicious Ghost Valley, Chan Ping guessed that they had probably visited Orchid Scent Town first, following which they continued to travel along the so-called official road after they finished sightseeing around the town. They were making a beeline for Green Cottage Town, and it was because of this that Chan Ping, who had taken many detours, had encountered them here. Since they were traveling along the so-called official road, this seemingly unremarkable small lake was probably the copper green lake described in the Be at Ease compilation. Like a pair of Tao partners in nature, this lake formed a natural pair with the nearby Copper Official Mountain. There were 2 species of incredibly famous fish in Copper Green Lake, but trying to catch these fish was no easy task. There was a huge list of rules, and after Chan Ping read through the complicated reasoning detailed in the book, he could only abandon any thoughts of trying to catch these fish himself. There was a species of luo fish with golden scales in the lake, and these fish had a pair of wings and a voice like mandarin ducks. They were extremely exotic and precious, and one could perhaps only catch a glimpse of them once every 100 years. It was rumored that luo fish would always appear in pairs, and as long as one was caught and brought ashore, the other would automatically jump ashore into the fish basket as well. Luo fish were only as big as a person's palm, yet their entire body was filled with treasures that could sell for 2 grain rain coins. It was said that one could become immune to the harassment of nightmares if one ate a luo fish. Apart from the luo fish, there was also the silver carp. This species of silver carp was incredibly large, and it was said that they would gain half a kilogram every single year. After 100 years, these silver carp would gain impressive strength as they roamed through the lake. Unlike the luo fish, however, these silver carp weren't unique to Copper Green Lake, and cultivators referred to them as small lake flood dragons. There was nothing special about the scales and flesh of silver carp, but as branch descendants of flood dragons, the only special thing about them was that they would grow 2 flood dragon whiskers measuring 1 inch long after living for 100 years. Afterward, these flood dragon whiskers would grow 1 inch every 300 years. If these flood dragon whiskers grew to 1 foot in length, then they would become truly valuable natural treasures. When crafting demon binding chains or horsetail whisks, adding such a flood dragon whisker was the best way to add icing to the cake. There were many other wonderful ways to use them. In saying this, Chan Ping had fought the Flood Dragon Trench and visited Stalactite Mountain before, so he was aware that there were still Taoist priests in the world who used genuine Flood Dragon whiskers to craft a complete, pseudo-celestial grade horsetail whisk. Because of this, Chan Ping didn't especially covet the luo fish and silver carp that were extremely difficult to encounter in Copper Green Lake. Trying to catch them would be far too big a waste of time. Looking at all of the catch records listed in the Be at Ease compilation, the successful fishermen had all spent an exorbitant amount of time, ranging from 1 month to half a year. During this time, the fishermen even needed to have battles of wits and courage with the 2 species of immortal fish in the lake, and there were many times when they would come close to success but ultimately fall short. Compared to Copper Green Lake, Chan Ping was more hopeful about his chances at Copper Official Mountain. Over there lived mountain-moving apes and mountain-chasing dogs with impure bloodlines. The young man appeared unfazed at Chan Ping's appearance. The female 6th-tier martial artist carrying a bow on her back and a saber by her hip shifted her feet slightly, positioning herself between her master and the uninvited guest. Meanwhile, the elder in black remained expressionless the entire time, holding an apricot-yellow porcelain wine pot in one hand and a large piece of braised pork in his other hand as he chewed slowly. Chan Ping collected dry branches in the distance and also started a campfire. The young man and his 2 subordinates were clearly here for Copper Green Lake. After the elder in black finished his meat and wine, he retrieved segments of verdant green bamboo from his pocket treasure before connecting them together to make an extremely long fishing rod. The fishing line was as thin as a hair, while the golden fishing hook was as large as a palm. The young man didn't idle around either, and he rolled up his sleeves and squatted down beside the lake, preparing the ground bait and kneading earnestly in a wooden bowl. From time to time, he would add a scoop of lake water and retrieve a porcelain bottle to add a few drops of extremely fishy vermilion liquid. Chan Ping also liked to fish, so he couldn't help but take a few extra glances. The young female martial artist quietly said something to the young man. The young man raised a hand and wiped away the sweat on his forehead, saying something in reply at the same time. The young woman stood up and walked toward Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an stood up and said, "Apologies, it wasn't my intention to pry." The young woman's expression was cold, yet her words were relatively amiable as she said, "It's okay for you to watch, but young master said that it's a taboo to make noise on the shore when fishing for silver carp. Just a slight movement or noise can cause the silver carp to flee far away. We're going to cast a line approximately 1 hour after we lay the ground bait, so we might need you to extinguish your campfire at that time. You won't be able to freely walk around either. If young master finds this too restrictive, then you can choose to rest further away from the shore." Chen Ping'an nodded and extinguished his campfire, deciding to move further from the shore and sit atop a tall tree. He rolled up his sleeves and continued to observe the 3 people fishing for immortal silver carp at night. When the young man saw Chen Ping'an directly extinguish his campfire, he was quite surprised and turned around to give an apologetic smile. Chen Ping'an also smiled and nodded in acknowledgement. The young female martial artist returned to the young man's side and breathed a soft sigh of relief. The young man smiled and said, "Big Sister Fan, the water in Copper Green Lake will truly rise by a foot if I pour these bowls of ground bait inside." The young woman smiled helplessly. When trying to catch peculiar fish in large marshes and huge lakes, making ground bait was a critical step that couldn't be skipped. This would exhaust a large amount of immortal coins, and the more precious the species of fish was, the more immortal coins the fisherman would need to spend. However, her young master was never stingy about these matters, so as word of this spread throughout the mountains to other like-minded people, her young master eventually gained the nickname 1-Foot Yuan. Even though Chen Ping'an was far away, he could still tell that the young man exuding an aura of wealth had spent a huge amount of immortal coins simply for the purpose of making the ground bait. This wasn't a few snowflake coins he was talking about, but rather 1 or 2 lesser heat coins. The 3 people started to wait quietly after laying the ground bait. Chen Ping'an grabbed his sword nurturing gourd and took a swig of stream water from Treasure Mirror Mountain. He then closed his eyes and started to rest his mind. He only opened his eyes again when the elder in black started to cast the line. There was a wind-like whoosh. The fishing line carved a huge arc through the air before landing far away in the central region of Copper Green Lake. The night was still young. When trying to catch big fish at night, technique was naturally important, but patience was essential as well. The young man sat on a small chair and yawned continuously as he held his cheeks in his hands. The young female martial artist continued to stand behind him, staying guarded against the young wanderer wearing the bamboo hat in the distance. When traveling outside the mountains, one should never intend to do harm to others, but one should always remain guarded against the ill intentions of others. For hours later, the young man was already starting to nod off. The elder in black gently raised the fishing rod and scattered ground bait a few times, following which he would cast the line once again. He was incredibly patient. Meanwhile, the young female martial artist didn't move a single muscle. Chen Ping'an leaned against a branch and gazed up at the night sky. Bright moon rising above the mountains, over a boundless sea of clouds. 3. There were countless mountains and waters in the majestic world, but there was only a single bright moon in the sky. Chen Ping'an became slightly adrift. He had heard that the immortal paintings of some immortal artists would have rising suns, setting moons, changing seasons, and blooming and wilting flowers contained within them. How were heaven and earth so vast, and how were humans so tiny in contrast? Why would a person feel lonely after growing up? Chen Ping'an gently pulled down his bamboo hat, causing it to cover his face. "I'm doing very well, Ningyao. Are you also doing well?" When morning arrived, the elder in black had already put away the fishing rod. Silver carp were innately fond of moonlight and afraid of sunlight, so they would only swim up from the bottom of the lake at nighttime, wandering around to look for food. In the off chance that they took the bait during daytime and were dragged ashore, silver carp that had developed intelligence would choose to sacrifice themselves and cause the spiritual energy in their 2 flood dragon whiskers to disperse. Even though the flood dragon whiskers wouldn't become completely worthless mortal items, they would definitely suffer a huge drop in quality and grade. However, the group of 3 people didn't become discouraged because of the result. To say nothing of spiritual fish like silver carp, even some species of ordinary fish coveted by ordinary fishermen were extremely difficult to catch. It was very normal to yield no results after fishing for a night. After the elder in black put away the fishing rod, He started to change the fishing line and the fishing hook. The biggest change was the fishing hook, going from a palm-sized hook to an especially small and exquisite hook that was only the size of a thumb. The young man started to make ground bait again, clearly using even more immortal coins this time. They were most likely preparing to fish for the rarer and more valuable luo fish. The young man suddenly recalled something, and he turned to the big tree and shouted, "Fellow cultivator, fishing for luo fish is purely down to luck, and there aren't any taboos relating to this. Do you want to head to the center of the lake to fish together with me? I have a bamboo raft, so we can fish from the raft together." The young female martial artist wanted to stop him, but it was already too late. The young man retrieved a thick and heavy copper coin that was as large as a child's hand, lightly rubbing it between his palms and causing a miniature bamboo raft the length of a finger to materialize in the air. He then gently exhaled on the bamboo raft before tossing it into the lake, causing the bamboo raft to suddenly grow in size as it landed in the water, sending a ripple through the lake. Chen Ping'an hesitated briefly before eventually nodding and accepting the young man's offer. He jumped down from the big tree and walked to the shore of the lake. Compressing her voice to a thread, the young female martial artist warned the elder in black that this young man was also a martial artist. Moreover, his cultivation base would only be higher than hers. When he was sleeping on the big tree last night, his breathing had been calm and long like slowly flowing water. His fist intent was also pure and condensed, and it was clear that he was a martial arts elite who had genuinely set foot on the path of the martial Tao. Generally speaking, it was only after reaching the 3 mind-tempering tiers that a martial artist could achieve a state of pseudo-sleep, with fist intent flowing through their entire body, as if they were being protected by a deity. Taking this into account, this young wanderer was most likely a descendant of a powerful clan. The elder in black used his mind's voice to reply, "I'm only worried about those earth immortal vagrant cultivators with improper backgrounds, and I'm actually less worried about skillful young martial artists such as this young man. Our 3 official attendant temple is least afraid of those insolent immortal forces in the mountains. Rest assured, I'll keep an eye on him while we fish." Young master is wearing both a Tao robe and an armor pellet at once, so he can block the full power attack of golden core tier sword immortals 1 or 2 times. Nothing can go wrong. Chen Ping'an stepped onto the bamboo raft, and they slowly drifted toward the center of the lake as the young female martial artist adeptly steered with a bamboo pole. The young man offered Chen Ping'an a small chair, and Chen Ping'an accepted it and expressed his thanks before retrieving his own fishing pole from his minimization treasure. As for the special bait, he naturally had to borrow this from the young man. There was a slightly surprised look in the young female martial artist's eyes. It wasn't common for martial artists to carry minimization treasures, so sure enough, this person was the descendant of a powerful clan. The elder in black didn't think too much about this, and his expression was calm and composed as he and his young master started to casually chat with the young wanderer wearing the bamboo hat. As if in tacit understanding, neither party mentioned their own surnames or background. A martial artist wearing a Tao robe while traveling around signified that they were yet to advance to the 3 mind-tempering tiers of martial arts. It was clear that the young man was from a wealthy background and hadn't traveled much through the cultivation world before. After casting a line with Chen Ping'an, he directly said, "Young master, I feel like there are few bad people among people who genuinely like to fish like us. What do you think? I feel like it's not very good for Grandpa Lu and Big Sister Fan to be so guarded against you." The elder in black remained unfazed and carefree as he grabbed some ground bait from a wooden bowl and casually tossed it into the lake. On the other hand, the young female martial artist with the surname Fan felt a little awkward. Chen Ping'an didn't know how to respond, so he could only mull over his words for a moment before offering a diplomatic reply saying, "There might still be bad people among them, but there will definitely be fewer. One can never be too careful when leaving the mountains to travel around the cultivation world." The young man shook his head and sighed, lamenting, "I know that you're saying this out of goodwill, but my great-grandpa, my grandpa, and my parents all speak whenever I leave home to travel outside. I'm genuinely getting a bit annoyed about this." Chen Ping'an didn't say anything in response. This was only a chance encounter, so it wasn't suitable for Chen Ping'an to comment on the family affairs of the young man. However, was this young man a bit too open and honest? Just how good was his family background for him to be so naive and careless? Something tugged at Chen Ping'an's mind, but he purposely pretended to not notice anything as he continued to stare at the surface of the lake. The elder in black turned around and gazed into the distance, saying with a faint smile, "Young master, the flax-robed sex Du Wency is about to arrive. We stayed at Orchid Scent Town for too long, and this likely caused our schedule to be delayed for a few days. This young golden courtier cultivator is probably feeling a bit worried, because he's afraid that we encountered some mishap." The young man felt a slight sense of grief and annoyance. He detested these kinds of social interactions. Things would be relatively okay if the other party were young and had similar interests, but he was genuinely not good at maintaining the relationship and the social niceties if the other party was of a senior generation. "Young master, I've heard that Du Wency is an amicable and good-natured person who doesn't seek conflict with others," the young female martial artist said quietly. "He passed by our clan when leaving Skeleton Shoal and traveling around the northern regions back then, and he developed a good rapport with great-grandfather, becoming good friends with him. He'll presumably have a good rapport with young master as well." The young man nodded and made a face at the young woman, chuckling. "Big sister Fan. I understand the social etiquette that I need to adhere to when traveling around in the outside world." There was a gentle look in the young woman's eyes as the corners of her mouth curled up into a slight smile. Chen Ping'an took a quick glance before retracting his gaze. The naive young man beside him was probably yet to realize the silent message hidden behind his big sister Fan's gentle gaze. A chi refiner dressed in snow-white hemp robes appeared free and unfettered as he flew over on the wind. There was a thunderous rumble in the distant horizon, sounding as if the winter thunder were rolling over. After arriving near Copper Green Lake, the Earth Immortal from the Flax-Robe sect slowed down his flying sword. His speed was still very quick, but there was almost no commotion and close to absolute silence. However, Du Wency didn't directly land on the bamboo raft, and he instead chose to land on the shore of the lake and quietly wait for them there. He didn't say anything either, presumably afraid that he would frighten the fish in Copper Green Lake. He was clearly a good-tempered person. Chen Ping'an was just about to reel in his line and put away his fishing rod. However, the young man unexpectedly turned around and offered with a smile, "You can continue to fish if you want. I can leave this bamboo raft with you, and I might need to make a trip to Green Cottage Town first before returning to Copper Green Lake to continue fishing for some silver carp. In any case, you also have a pocket treasure, so I can teach you the mantra to release and retract the bamboo raft. It's extremely simple. Afterward, you can hand the bamboo raft to any cultivator from the Flax-Robe sect when you travel to Green Cottage Town." Chen Ping'an shook his head and replied, "I'm about to set off again, so there's no need. I boarded the raft and fished in order to relax my mind." The young man wouldn't go as far as to force other people to accept his goodwill. After returning to the shore together, the young man put away his bamboo raft and bowed in respect to the young golden courtier cultivator from the Flax-Robe sect, greeting with a dazzling smile. The 3 official attendant temples Yuan Xian pays his respects to Uncle Du. Du Wency smiled and nodded in acknowledgement, saying, "I guessed that you would be fishing here at Copper Green Lake, so I initially planned to look for you a little later. However, sect leader Zhu was rushing me, so I didn't dare to not come. Anyhow, is your great-grandfather still doing well?" Yuan Xian smiled and replied, "He's as healthy and strong as can be." Du Wency smiled upon hearing this. Chen Ping'an cupped his fists and bade farewell. When Chen Ping'an and Du Wency locked gazes, the two of them nodded in acknowledgement at almost exactly the same time. Chen Ping'an had only taken a few steps when Yuan Xian caught up to him and said in a quiet voice, "If you're traveling to Green Cottage Town, then it's best that you take the official road. It might be long and winding, but it's at least safe. If you want to travel quicker, then you'll need to traverse across that desolate land that's permeating with miasma and roamed by great demons. These great demons have carved up the land to become kings of their own territories, and they're astonishingly bold and actually refer to themselves as the 6 sages. They're extremely ruthless and violent, and they've banded together to rival the city lords in the central region of malicious Ghost Valley. The ghosts from the cities often do battle with these demons, and it's as if they're 2 armies facing off on a battlefield. In fact, it's said that one of the great demons is collecting a huge number of military books to study military tactics, which truly seems quite comical." Chen Ping'an nodded and replied, "I'll keep this in mind and make sure to be careful. Here's wishing you good luck and an abundant yield with your fishing." May you catch many luo fish and silver carp. Yuan Xian nodded earnestly in response. Since he had accidentally revealed his name just then, he decided that he might as well go ahead and introduce himself, saying, I'm Yuan Xian, and I'm a disciple of the three official attendant temple. Qian Ping'an hesitated for a moment before smiling and saying, I'm Qian Ping'an from the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Yuan Xian chuckled and remarked, in fact, I could tell from your accent that you were from another continent. Qian Ping'an smiled and praised, You're an experienced member of the cultivation world. Yuan Xian faltered upon hearing this and he asked, Are you saying this sincerely? No, just out of politeness, Qian Ping'an replied. Yuan Xian chortled with laughter, appearing as happy as could be. It was just as he had said, all of the fishermen in the world were one big family. There were few bad people among them. He had liked to fish ever since a young age, and he had naturally been taught by his great-grandpa who was extremely skilled at fishing. His great-grandpa had said a long time ago that the wise enjoyed the water, and those who liked to fish were even rarer and more praiseworthy. This was because those who were wise and astute actually found it harder to calm their minds. Meanwhile, fishing most tested a person's patience and stillness. Yuan Xian and Qian Ping'an bade farewell to each other. The three official attendant temples Yuan Xian and his two subordinates walked along the official road and followed Du Wenxi to Green Cottage Town. Meanwhile, Qian Ping'an made his way to Copper Official Mountain. He was going to take a look at the mountain-moving apes and mountain-chasing dogs over there, and he especially wanted to test out the extremely tough physiques of the former. As for the three official attendant temple that Yuan Xian was from, Qian Ping'an had already learned about it when he was still at the Dragon Spring Prefecture, and studying the traditions and customs of the northern complete reed continent. The three official attendant temple was the largest weapons shop in the northern complete reed continent, and it enjoyed a brilliant reputation and genuinely had friends throughout the world. Of course, the cultivators of the three official attendant temple were also most renowned for their impressive fighting skills. Now it made sense why the young man Yuan Xian was so naive and kind-hearted. He was a bit similar to old Dragon City's Fan Air. He appeared a little similar to the pure white continent's Liu Yuzhou as well, someone who owned the Ape Havoc estate at Stalactite Mountain. Yuan Xian was a disciple of the three official attendant temple, whom even sect leader Zhu Quan of the Flax Robe sect paid attention to, and he was now being personally welcomed by Du Wenxi, a golden courtier cultivator. As such, could the ghosts and entities in malicious Ghost Valley truly appear like ruthless and violent great demons in his eyes? At the end of the day, he was merely giving a friendly reminder to Qian Ping'an. The world would perhaps be a much more peaceful place if the descendants of rich clans were all like Yuan Xian. However, it was a shame that there were many wealthy and powerful descendants like Bamboo Scroll Lake's Huang He, the prince whom Qian Ping'an had encountered at the border and located in the Parasol Leaf Continent's Great Quan Empire, and the prince who had attempted to kill Qian Ping'an that snowy and windy night yet was killed by Qian Ping'an instead. Qian Ping'an had come across many people who deserved death and were given death, yet he was seemingly never able to kill enough of them to eliminate them completely. These people would leverage their relationships and networks to reach prominent positions, and they would continuously pop up one after another like sprouting bamboo shoots after the spring rain. Even if they were razed to the ground, they would still come back to life with the spring wind. Were there far too few people like Mr. Qi in the world? Or was it necessary for people like Cui Chan to exist? Walking along a small and secluded path in the mountain wilderness, Qian Ping'an grabbed his sword-nurturing gourd and took a swig of its contents. However, he discovered that it was water from the mountain stream instead of wine. Qian Ping'an glanced back at his shadow cast on the ground by the sun. With a tap of his feet, Qian Ping'an sprinted across the top of the thatched grass and rapidly made his way to Copper Official Mountain. The mountain-moving Great Sage, one of the so-called 6 sages of malicious Ghost Valley, hailed from the Copper Official Mountain, and this mountain-moving ape possessed an incredibly tough and refined physique and wielded a pair of meteor hammers. Meanwhile, after Yuan Xian parted ways with Qian Ping'an, when the young man realized that Du Wenxi was a kindly senior who didn't speak very much, he actually became more talkative than normal, recounting the interesting experiences and observations from his trip to Du Wenxi. As they walked, Du Wenxi turned his head once, whether intentionally or not, and he glanced at the disappearing figure of the young wanderer. The young golden courtier cultivator from the Flax Robe sect who enjoyed an equal standing with Mural City's Yang Lin, had a contemplative look on his face. A few things had taken place at Meticulous Skin City, and it was said that a female official had been severely wounded by a young sword immortal at Crow Peak. Not only that, but Fan Yunluo had almost died by the blade of the young sword immortal as well. In the end, it was White Cage City's Pu Rang who had stepped forward to stop the young sword immortal, preventing the commotion from becoming even greater. Du Wenxi was curious about how Yuan Xian had become acquainted with the young wanderer. This person didn't seem like a reckless cultivator, so why was he so intense and unyielding? He presumably hadn't been in Malicious Ghost Valley for too long, yet he had directly caught Pu Rang's attention already? No one in Malicious Ghost Valley could stop Pu Rang if he were hellbent on killing someone. Even sect leader Zhu Quan couldn't stop him, and perhaps the unpolished Jade-tier heroic spirit from Skeleton Wall City couldn't stop him either. Pu Rang was especially cruel and vicious when he targeted sword cultivators, never holding back as he killed them. Du Wenxi felt slightly anxious as he thought about the subtle movements and hidden undercurrents flowing through the various large cities in Malicious Ghost Valley in the recent years. He had an imperceptible feeling that a storm was brewing. Du Wenxi could already be regarded as the Qi refiner who cared least about mortal non-cultivation matters in the Flax Robe sect, and from the sect leader to his fellow disciples, everyone would consciously accommodate this and allow him to not become involved in such matters. This allowed him to put his complete focus on cultivation and breaking through to the next tier. However, even Du Wenxi was able to detect the restlessness in Malicious Ghost Valley now, so this was a clear reflection of the seriousness of the situation. As for Meticulous Skin City's Fan Yunluo announcing to the outside world that he was her sworn brother, Du Wenxi didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. In fact, he was quite impressed that she was able to come up with something, so he decided to let it be. The foundation of a cultivator's great Tao was like a large mountain. Mortal matters were like fleeting clouds, and the life cycle of vegetation and the flow of mountain streams didn't need to be retained, so there was no need to worry about these matters either. Chen Ping'an walked slowly. His mind drifted far away, and he was unable to calm down the entire time. Perhaps the world wasn't as good as he imagined it to be. However, perhaps it wasn't as bad as he imagined it to be either. At the end of the day, each of these possibilities represented a potential accident or surprise. When walking along the path of life, each person that one came across might be the ideal person of someone else's dreams. Chen Ping'an was increasingly able to understand the thought process of those who performed sinister deeds. However, he was still unable to understand why sinister people could live such good lives. In fact, they sometimes lived even better lives than good people. There was a deep and solemn look in Chen Ping'an's eyes. It wasn't long before the dark fog in his mind cleared up, however. In reality, Chen Ping'an was only feeling gloomy because he had failed to encounter a single mountain-moving ape after walking around Copper Official Mountain. To say nothing of mountain-moving apes, he hadn't even come across a single mountain-chasing dog. Du Wenxi had presumably caused quite a big commotion when traveling on the wind just then, so he had perhaps frightened the ghosts and entities in this region. This caused Chen Ping'an to feel slightly frustrated and helpless. Ordinarily speaking, the violent and aggressive mountain-moving apes would actively show themselves once they caught the slightest scent of a human. Chen Ping'an purposely lingered around, wandering all over the mountain with his cultivation base suppressed to that of an ordinary fifth-tier martial artist. However, he didn't get a single bite even after wandering around for more than half a day. In the end, Chen Ping'an had no option but to rest in an area with a good field of view. He planned to camp here for the night, and he would leave and continue his trip to Green Cottage if he still failed to encounter any mountain-moving apes or mountain-chasing dogs. He refused to believe that he wouldn't come across any of the 6 sages of Malicious Ghost Valley afterward. Chen Ping'an made a campfire and sat still for the entire night, practicing the sword furnace stance of standing meditation. Failing to encounter any beasts, he had no option but to leave Copper Official Mountain. Inside an extremely pungent secret cave located on Copper Official Mountain, a silverback mountain-moving ape that hadn't chosen to assume human form peered through a well-concealed window that was only as large as a palm. Even though it could walk like a human, its facial features and body full of hair were still extremely jarring to look at. It waved a hand, and a short man with thievish eyes quickly scuttled over from behind. The mountain-moving ape's voice was hoarse as it said, Make haste and report this matter to the mountain-moving great sage and those guests. Tell them that the young wanderer genuinely came here. There's no doubt about it, and he was definitely the one who caused significant issues for Meticulous Skin City. The short man was just about to leave via an underground passage. However, the mountain-moving ape said in warning, "Remember to use your brain and choose a more hidden path. You're better off taking a huge detour than to run into that person's sword and seek death. It doesn't matter if you die, but if you delay the proper matters of the mountain-moving great sage, I'll make sure to cook your entire nest of rat descendants." The short man smiled obsequiously and replied, "I definitely won't delay the proper matters." He then walked along the underground passage, eventually exiting through a crack in some faraway mountain face. He jumped forward and reverted to his true form, a gigantic black rat that was as large as a dog. After doing this, he started to sprint as quickly as he could. Whether a bird or a rat, each form of being would have their own method of survival. This rat looked fat on the surface, but it was actually very quick and nimble as it dashed through the mountains and over the peaks like a bolt of lightning. It didn't dare to slow down at all as it sprinted toward its destination. After leaving the territory of Copper Official Mountain, the rat spirit suddenly burrowed into the ground and only reappeared near some tree roots half a kilometer away after approximately 15 minutes. He stuck his head out and looked around, only lowering his head and continuing to sprint forward after he made sure that no one was following him. However, the rat spirit could never imagine that there was actually a stranger following him from a great distance. After the young man took off his bamboo hat, unstrapped sword immortal from his back, and untied his sword nurturing gourd, he put on the face mask of a young boy. The rat spirit was already careful enough, but the abilities of the person following him were seemingly one level higher. Noon arrived, and the rat spirit finally arrived at the mountain residence of the mountain-moving great sage, after carefully navigating along the border that connected the territories of two great demons. He assumed human form again, and he was drenched in sweat and panting heavily. Even though the 6 sages were like brothers who faced external enemies together, it wasn't anything surprising for there to be some slight disagreements and friction between them, like that between couples and siblings. However, this was bad news for their lackeys who possessed low cultivation bases, with these underlings occasionally becoming meals for the so-called sages for no apparent reason. Indeed, eating these lackeys could fill the bellies and increase the cultivation bases of the 6 sages, and those lackeys who couldn't even maintain their human forms for an extended period of time were nothing more than worthless commodities. The mountain path was wide, and the rat spirit became filled with courage after returning to his own territory. He rolled up his sleeves and was just about to climb up the mountain, yet he suddenly saw a familiar figure walking over along a small path from another direction. This was a hunchbacked old man who was unsteady as he walked, appearing much like a stumbling old farmer from the fields. The rat spirit was delighted, and he giddily ran over and shouted, "This underling pays his respects to old ancestor." A thick hemp rope was tied around the old man's waist, and he appeared quite unattractive as he walked over in straw sandals with his eyes squinted as if his vision was impaired and his hearing was compromised. He cocked his head and asked loudly, "Who are you? And what did you just say?" The rat spirit grabbed the old man's arm and replied, "It's me. I came from Copper Official Mountain, and I even have some blood relationship with old ancestor." The old man nodded and didn't turn down the rat spirit's giddy support. However, he suddenly came to a stop after taking a few steps, wrinkling his nose before widening his eyes and looking around with an intense gaze. He no longer appeared like a worn old man at this instant, and he continued to look around as he said in a stern voice, "No, something isn't right. I smell a human. I definitely smell a human. Very well. How truly sneaky and well concealed. You almost managed to trick me as well." The rat spirit went weak at the knees, with his legs trembling severely as he almost collapsed to the ground in terror. As it turned out, that young sword immortal from the rumors had been following him the entire time? He's run away? The hunchbacked old man suddenly mused. He then turned to his descendant and berated him loudly, scolding in fury. "You're a piece of useless trash. You were completely oblivious even though someone was following you the entire time? If that person was a spy sent over by those dirty people, and if they ruin our mountain and water formation, then you won't be able to make up for things even if you die 100 times over. The legs of the rat spirit buckled, and he collapsed to the ground with his face as white as a sheet. Fortunately, he didn't forget about the proper matters, and he recounted the events on Copper Official Mountain to his old ancestor. The expression of the old man changed again and again. The seemingly senile old man held an incredibly lofty status. He was one of the 6 sages, and he referred to himself as the demon-hunting immortal. The undying old geezer was a spirit himself, yet he had a demon-binding chain around his waist and even had 2 flood dragon whiskers from Copper Green Lake's 1,000-year-old silver carp, hidden inside the demon-binding chain. It was child's play for him to capture ordinary ghosts and demons, and his victims would have their skin and flesh ripped apart, and their bones crushed into pieces once they were caught. According to the demon-hunting immortal, only meat was chewy enough for his liking. Moreover, only the drops of fresh blood that seeped out of such meat would taste like wine. The demon-hunting immortal suddenly grabbed his demon-binding chain and tossed it forward, causing it to dash around the surroundings like a slithering snake. After a short while, it returned to the old man's hand like a bolt of lightning. He's indeed run away. The demon-hunting immortal rode away on the mists and clouds, no longer walking in a calm and leisurely manner as he had before. He hurriedly made his way to the cave abode constructed by the mountain-moving great sage. Dozens of kilometers away, Jian Lai, who had put on the face mask of a young boy to disguise himself, rapidly but quietly dashed through the mountain forest. He wasn't retreating in the face of difficulty or anything, and he had simply changed his mind on the spot. When following the rat spirit to the mountain-moving great sage's mountain abode just then, Jian Lai had seen a group of spirits from afar. They had caught and tied up a skinny and decorous young scholar in azure, with the hands and feet of this young man tied to a bamboo pole. 2 lackeys who had assumed incomplete human forms were carrying the bamboo pole on their shoulders, causing it to sway from side to side as they walked. The pitiful young scholar was barely hanging on to life as he was carelessly swung around like livestock. The spirit leading the group had assumed complete human form, and he was dressed in scholarly garb and appeared extremely refined and elegant. There was a folding fan made from bones in his hand, and there was a blooming peach tree branch illustrated on the fan. The spirit slowly rocked the folding fan back and forth in front of his chest. Walking beside him was an elder with a goatee, and the 2 of them chatted casually as they walked. They had especially traveled away to welcome someone just then, and the refined and elegant spirit holding the folding fan was the most favored and trusted subordinate of Lady Bishu. One he was often able to capture living people from Copper Stench City and bring them back to improve and add flavor to Lady Bishu's meals. The elder with the goatee chuckled and said, "Scholars are truly a rare find here, so they'll definitely taste incredibly delicious. How did Master manage to catch him? Care to share the details?" The spirit holding the bony folding fan appeared extremely proud and smug as he explained slowly. "It took me quite some planning. This naive young man was enjoying the scenery near Copper Stench City, so I approached him to talk about some poetry and music. After we enjoyed a hearty conversation, I tricked him into leaving the jurisdiction of Copper Stench City by himself, as this would mean 0 trouble caused for Lady Bishu. Even if Copper Stench City noticed something amiss afterward, I wouldn't be in the wrong either." The voice of the feeble scholar quivered as he said, "I'm a new scholar handpicked and appointed by Copper Stench City, so you people can't eat me." "You can't eat me? If Lady Bishu truly wants to eat people, then I can help you trick a few more people over. I can trick woodsmen in the mountains or trick those women who look up to me and admire my talent. I can trick anyone you want." The spirit holding the folding fan chuckled derisively and sneered. "Can the words of scholars like us be believed? You believed me not long ago, didn't you? And what was the outcome?" The scholar silently shed tears. Copper Stench City was a very strange and unique city located near Green Cottage Town. It was filled with people from all walks of life, with both living people and ghosts coexisting in a surprisingly peaceful manner. Compared to the other cities in Malicious Ghost Valley, it could be said that Copper Stench City was one of the most peaceful cities in this mystical realm. There were rarely any malicious ghosts or violent spirits wandering around the outskirts of Copper Stench City, and the rules inside the city were also incredibly strict. Killing other people or ghosts was strictly forbidden. This was thanks to Copper Stench City's close vicinity to Green Cottage Town. More precisely, this was thanks to sect leader Zhu Quan, also known as esteemed immortal Guoqi. There were approximately 20,000 living people in Copper Stench City, and many of them had lived here for generations after generation. In the beginning, the ancestors of these people were cultivators who had fled here following the destruction of their immortal forces. They had offered Copper Stench City a huge sum of money to stay here and live in peace, and after several hundred years, many of their descendants still enjoyed a calm and peaceful life in the city. Afterward, many itinerant cultivators continued to gather at Copper Stench City, and the dynamic in the city was similar to that of the commoners who coexisted with ghosts and spirits near the mountains of the immortal forces. Both sides were accustomed to living with each other. However, the humans who lived near Copper Stench City would often suffer from a short lifespan, with those in their 50s already considered very old. At the same time, the mortal women in Copper Stench City were all extremely beautiful and charming even if they didn't possess any cultivation aptitude at all. Unfortunately, however, their beauty would wither very quickly, and they would often start to display signs of old age after just 25 years of age. This was truly a huge shame. Copper Stench City would choose a group of beautiful young girls of around 13 or 14 years old each year to receive meticulous training from some older women. Afterward, these young girls would be offered to the various neighboring cities to become the concubines or maidservants of the powerful entities. This was in order to build a good relationship with the powerful entities and perhaps win them over. The city lord of Copper Stench City also had a younger sister who was just as famous as he was. On the 15th day of every new year, she would stand on the city wall and scatter some gold coins. This was a hobby of hers, and she would occasionally include 1 or 2 lesser heat coins among the gold coins as well. There was a hall of supreme harmony in Copper Stench City, and there was a small imperial court within this hall. The city lord had appointed 100 or so scholarly officials and military generals in a single go, building up the 6 ministries and filling all the official posts. The city was small, but all the essential positions were now occupied. The officials would assemble every 10 days, making them appear much like the imperial court of a proper mortal empire. There were even imperial examinations, and the only thing that was missing was the regional examinations that usually took place beforehand. There were only royal examinations that took place in the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Copper Stench City only had a small population, after all, and the number of scholars and literati was even smaller. The city lord's younger sister had appointed herself as the so-called prime minister examiner, and she was responsible for writing the questions and marking the exams. Right now, it was as if the 2 people in Lady Bishu's residence in Peeling Mountain had walked into a game of Go where victory and defeat were extremely difficult to determine. There were 3 options, and the first was for Chan Ping'an and the scholar to fight to the death. Only one person would emerge victorious, and the loser would most likely suffer death. The second option was for one party to relent. For example, Chan Ping'an could choose to shoulder the consequences of Lady Bishu's death, or the scholar could play nice and not use Chan Ping'an as a scapegoat. The third option was for both of them to take a step back, leaving this game of Go on Peeling Mountain. In other words, one would uphold the morality and justice of the cultivation world, while the other would make money and harmony. Afterward, they would both turn their blades toward the 5 remaining demons of the 6 sages. You're not a demon? You're a spirit of malicious Ghost Valley, who engulfs other spirits. Chan Ping'an asked. The scholar patted his sleeves and huffed. I'm a living person, a living and breathing person. My pure yang righteous energy is as real as can be, and I was simply using an unorthodox technique to scare you when I subdued the demon just then. After all, how can one travel through the cultivation world without some techniques to conceal one's identity? Then should we form an alliance? Should we go and target that dust-warding primordial lord? Chan Ping'an asked. There was a strange look in the feeble scholar's eyes. Chan Ping'an glanced at the skeleton of Lady Bishu on the ground and came to a sense of realization. It was his fault for not understanding the situation and exposing some clues. Since Lady Bishu was already dead, how could her residence in Peeling Mountain not have any accumulated wealth? As such, did it make sense for them to leave empty-handed after entering this mountain of treasure? It was clear that Chan Ping'an wasn't a cultivator accustomed to looting other people. Chan Ping'an changed the topic and asked with a smile. With how you've been plotting and scheming, it's clear that you're familiar with the secret treasure storage of this moon hall. How about we split the spoils 50-50? The scholar shook his head and replied, We should split the spoils 30-70 at Peeling Mountain, with you taking 30 and me taking 70. You simply squatted on the wall and watched on, so giving you 30% of the spoils is already very generous. Regarding the other demons, we'll determine how to split the spoils depending on our abilities, and taking into account our contributions. Chun Ping shook his head and said, 40-60. The scholar was extremely hesitant, and after mulling over this for a while, he pointed at the skeleton on the ground and said with a reluctant expression, even though the skeleton of Lady Bishu isn't the white jade skeleton of the other ghosts and entities, she's absorbed the essence of the sun and the moon in malicious Ghost Valley for almost 1,000 years, so she's already tempered her skeleton to a state superior to the golden branch and jade leaves of earth immortal cultivators. This is extremely precious, so we'll split the remaining treasures 30-70 after I give this to you. I'm showing you enough sincerity, right? Chun Ping chuckled in ridicule and sniggered. This item is like a hot potato, so accepting it will be equivalent to smearing mud on my crotch. I'll be guilty even if I'm not. That being the case, shouldn't this be even more reason for us to split the treasures 40-60? In addition, the most valuable part of a mountain spirit was naturally its demon core. However, the scholar had most likely engulfed this when devouring Lady Bishu just then. In other words, he had already made a huge gain. There was a look of realization on the scholar's face as he patted his head and said in apology, "That was my bad. Alright, then let's split the treasures 40-60, and we'll just leave this skeleton here. Let's go. I'll bring you to loot the curious and secret treasures of Peeling Mountain." The entrance is under Lady Bishu's mandarin duck bed. This toad didn't possess a very high cultivation base, but thanks to her lover's rewards and the generosity of the 5 other demons, she's actually accumulated quite an impressive amount of treasures as well. The scholar walked into the residence first. Chun Ping jumped off the wall after placing Sword Immortal back inside the scabbard on his back, and he walked toward the residence behind the scholar. However, he also flicked his sleeve and placed the skeleton of Lady Bishu inside his minimization treasure. The scholar stopped and turned around, a look of astonishment on his face. Chun Ping smiled faintly and explained, "Won't it be a bad result if we accidentally let the spirits of Peeling Mountain see this? We'll end up alerting our opponents, and that will cause significant issues for the grand plan to kill the 5 demons. That being the case, it's better for me to retrieve Lady Bishu's corpse first." "Then perhaps I should thank you," the scholar chuckled in anger. Chun Ping paid no heed to the scholar's words. He observed his surroundings, and he saw many precious curios in the large and open room. However, the smell of makeup was too strong, and there was actually a debauched piece of erotic painting on the wall. The painting was extremely large, measuring at least 3 meters in height, but the men and women were fortunately only as large as peanuts. There were depictions of emperors making love with their concubines, men indulging themselves in brothels, and even a couple in Taoist robes with the man possessing the demeanor of a transcendent being and the woman filled with a divine glow. It appeared as if the couple were practicing a dual cultivation method in bed. There were also many regular script characters packed closely together on the painting, providing notes for each illustrated scene. Perhaps these were so-called brilliant books, the type that Julien enjoyed reading? The scholar kicked the huge mandarin duck bed, but he controlled his force in a gentle manner, causing the bed to remain silent as it slid more than a dozen meters across the room. He squatted down after doing this, and he lowered his head and examined a round piece of metal essence that was embedded in the floor. This piece of metal essence was as large as a basin and as smooth as a mirror, and it appeared as if the scholar was trying to solve this mechanism. The scholar glanced back, and he couldn't help but feel angry. This young wanderer dressed in azure and wearing a bamboo hat was truly quite impressive. Like a thief who wasn't willing to miss a single item, he not only took the 6 immortal paintings that possessed secrets about cultivation, but he even grabbed all of the bottles and containers on Lady Bishu's makeup table. What in the world was this? Had he never seen money in his life? However, the scholar quickly turned around and continued to observe the strange piece of metal essence that was unsullied like a treasure mirror. He furrowed his brows in a gloomy manner. The young wanderer knew that they were going to enter the treasure chamber of Moon Hall afterward, a place that was filled with genuine treasures, so why was he still looting all of these worthless items without restraint? Perhaps he had a minimization treasure? After all, pocket treasures couldn't hold such a large number of items. Qian Ping'an continued to rifle through the chests and cabinets as he asked, "You said that Lady Bishu was a seed from the Moon Palace just then. What does that mean?" The scholar lightly ran one hand across the perimeter of the round mirror, forming seals with his other hand and performing non-stop calculations in his mind. "There exists the sun and the moon between heaven and earth, with the moon representing the essence of yin energy," the scholar replied casually. "It's said that there was a moon palace in the primordial heavenly court, and its name was the vast cold palace. There were osmanthus trees in the moon palace, and there was also a rabbit spirit and a toad. These beings are the old ancestors of the moon palace seeds, and the cool mists and gentle smoke, as well as the permeating immortal qi, allowed these seeds to eventually become spirits and deities. For example, Lady Bishu was a descendant of the toad from the moon palace. However, just like the myriad of descendants of flood dragons, these descendants also possess different levels, with the gulf between them potentially being huge. Peeling Mountain's Lady Bishu was a relatively passable demon and moon palace seed. You're a very knowledgeable person, Qian Ping'an praised. Qian Ping'an didn't walk over to the metal essence as the scholar examined the mechanism, and he maintained a distance of 10 paces between them as he continued to look through the items in the room. He was wordlessly expressing his attitude toward the scholar. A moment later, Qian Ping'an sat down on a rosewood chair. Hearing Qian Ping'an's praise, the scholar shook his head and remarked with emotion, "Life is limited, while knowledge is unlimited. To pursue that which is unlimited with that which is limited, such is a tiresome task indeed." Qian Ping'an casually continued. The scholar turned around and glanced at Qian Ping'an. Qian Ping'an crossed his legs and flicked his wrist, retrieving the jade bamboo folding fan that Cui Dongshan had gifted him and lightly rocking it back and forth. The scholar had already turned back around, and he extended a finger and gently tapped the surface of the round and mirror-like metal essence, causing sections of it to slowly rise up. In the end, the metal essence transformed into a structure that looked like a palace. It was as if pagodas were rising from the bright moon. Qian Ping'an hurriedly returned his folding fan to his pocket treasure, and he didn't have time to worry about taboos or whatnot anymore as he walked to the scholar's side and focused his gaze on the metal essence that had been smooth and flawless a moment ago. When looking at it from a distance just then, it had appeared like a smooth mirror that had been tempered hundreds upon thousands of times. However, who knew that it was actually this mystical? What astonished Qian Ping'an even more was the fact that he still felt like the metal essence had been too smooth and flawless just then, regardless of how he focused his gaze on it right now. However, the scholar frowned and extended his hand, pushing down the palace that had its gates tightly shut. The metal essence became flat and smooth again, and Qian Ping'an didn't avert his gaze as he clicked his tongue in wonder. Such exquisite craftsmanship actually existed in the world? Qian Ping'an had no time to worry about whether he was making himself appear suspicious or not as he said, "Rest assured, I won't stoop so low as to launch a surprise attack on you." The scholar sat down cross-legged and said slowly, "There's no doubt that this is an immortal treasure crafted by Mahist mechanists, and it's clearly quite old already. How about you keep this treasure, and we'll go with a 30-70 split after we enter the treasure chamber." "Deal," Qian Ping'an nodded and said without hesitation. The scholar suddenly smiled, and his fingers became a blur as he tapped the surface of the smooth metal essence. A miniature palace instantly rose into the air once more. Moreover, the entrance of the palace opened slowly, causing the entire structure to become enveloped in flowing light that illuminated their faces. The floorboards started to creak afterward, and the scholar reached down and retrieved the dazzling orb, making him look much like an immortal holding a bright moon as he rotated his wrist and rubbed his hands together. The palace reflected in the orb appeared like an immortal mystical realm that had retreated back into the earth. A secret passage opened up in the floorboards, and it didn't appear too dark as a soft yellow glow gently swayed back and forth. This was most likely similar to the immortal techniques that Mural City used to light up the city with lanterns. The scholar handed the dazzling orb to Qian Ping'an and repeated, "We'll split the treasures 30-70. We've already agreed to this." "Naturally," Qian Ping'an replied with a nod. The two of them paused slightly. One person handed over the item, and the other person accepted the item, and they were both using a single hand as they did this. The scholar smiled faintly, and his other sleeve that was resting beside him swayed slightly, causing some peculiar phenomenon to calm down. Qian Ping'an's hand, which was hidden inside his sleeve and holding the walnut bracelet, also loosened its grip. The immortal treasure changed hands. Qian Ping'an placed the dazzling orb inside his minimization treasure before following the scholar into the underground passageway. The passageway that snaked down into the earth appeared slightly damp, and there was also concentrated energy and dark moss growing on the walls. This was as expected of a secret den created by a moon palace seed. Qian Ping'an and the scholar eventually arrived at the stone cave located at the end of the passageway. There were two skeletons sitting side by side, with one taller and one shorter, and one bulkier and one skinnier. They looked like Tao partners and they were holding hands tightly. One could vaguely detect that they had left the world peacefully. The man was wearing the royal crown of emperors and dressed in a yellow dragon robe. But the woman wasn't wearing a phoenix crown and dressed in palatial garment. Instead, she was simply wearing an immortal robe that looked like a Tao robe but wasn't actually a Tao robe. Apart from the two skeletons, there were also 3 chests stacked together in the corner of the stone cave. The scholar frowned and remained silent as he looked at the 2 skeletons. Is this some ruler who was defeated in the great battle that took place at Skeleton Shoal? Qian Ping'an asked. The scholar nodded and replied, "It's extremely likely that this is the ruler of the Ridge Mountain Nation, someone who was a despondent and unfavored illegitimate prince in his youth." The lofty moral sect was the biggest sect in the southern region of the northern complete reed continent at the time, and the successful cultivators in the mountain were all respectfully referred to as hidden immortals. Tracing the roots of the conflict between the 2 great empires, it becomes clear that the calamity was actually born from internal conflict in the lofty moral sect. However, the immortal sects of later generations all treat this as a secret and don't announce the truth to the outside world. The ruler of the Ridge Mountain Nation had ambitions of cultivation during his youth, and he had concealed his identity and visited the immortals in the mountains. Including him, the lofty moral sect had recruited 30 direct disciples that year. There hadn't been anything out of the ordinary in the beginning, and it had simply been a typical case of Green Mountain Peak's ancestral hall recruiting disciples. However, the other immortal forces in the northern complete reed continent noticed something peculiar after just 60 years, with half of those disciples being prodigious cultivators who had the potential to become Earth immortals. Meanwhile, the remaining half of the 30 disciples also had their own fortunes and fated opportunities that couldn't be disregarded. As a result, future generations let their minds run wild as they thought about that recruitment ceremony, with one poem stating, "The sound of drums opened the Golden Gate, 30 immortal prodigies ascending Green Mountain Peak." The ruler of Ridge Mountain Nation was one of these 30 immortals, and he could be regarded as extremely talented even among his fellow disciples. However, it was a shame that the royal family members who could ascend the throne of the Ridge Mountain Nation passed away one after another, forcing him to leave the mountains. He had already reached the Dragon Gate tier at that time, but he still chose to sever his cultivation base and ascend the throne. The unofficial history books that are rife in the streets and alleys claim that he had a close relationship with an immortal nun from the lofty moral sect's Phoenix Song Peak, but this was a claim that I didn't believe before. Now, however, it seems like these history books were telling the truth. The scholar heaved a long sigh and turned his gaze away from the 2 skeletons. The dragon robe looked valuable, but it was only an ordinary mortal treasure. The dragon aura of the man had already been absorbed, or perhaps it had slowly dispersed with the passing of time. After all, the dragon aura would disperse following the collapse of a notion. As for the female cultivator, the immortal robe of the lofty moral sect that she was wearing wasn't an immortal treasure either. Rather, it was an ordinary immortal robe that all disciples of the sect would receive from the ancestral hall. This mortal ruler and the female cultivator from Phoenix Song Peak were presumably nostalgic people who cherished the past. The scholar walked over and opened the 3 chests. One chest was filled with thousands of dazzling snowflake coins, and another chest held an ancient stone stele which was inscribed with a dense array of seal script characters. As for the chest that was placed at the very bottom, there was only a single item inside, that being a small stone mortar that reached knee height. This was no different from the stone mortars that ordinary mortals used to pound glutinous rice. The scholar's expression changed slightly, but he quickly shook his head lightly, clearly skeptical about the suspicion in his mind. Qian Ping'an smiled and asked, "This isn't the stone mortar of the legends, right?" The one that the rabbit spirit used to pound medicinal herbs on the Moon Palace. Then how about we make a bet? The scholar suggested with a chuckle. What are we betting? Chun Ping'an asked. The scholar pointed at the stone mortar in the chest and replied, we'll count this item as 70 and the remaining items as 30. However, I'll let you choose first. Chun Ping'an didn't hesitate at all, and he was just about to choose the 30. However, the scholar suddenly interrupted and said, don't choose yet. I take that back. He launched a gentle palm strike, causing the stone mortar to instantly disintegrate into dust and reveal a white jade bowl. There was slight pity in his voice as he lamented. Sure enough, this white jade bowl was the Dao attainment location of Lady Bishu. However, because she's a Moon Palace seed, she decided to envelop this white jade bowl in a stone mortar, presumably as a good omen. The scholar picked up the bowl and turned it around. There were 8 tiny characters in regular script on the bottom, reading, Lofty Morals Hidden Immortals, offering wine to invite the moon. This was a ritual vessel from the ancestral hall of the Lofty Morals sect. It was only a measly spirit tool. However, this white jade bowl naturally held great significance for Lady Bishu, who had embarked on the path of cultivation and become a toad spirit. Are you going to choose that Dragon Gate steel? Or are you going to choose that chest of snowflake coins? Chun Ping'an asked. The scholar raised a brow. Seal scripts were also categorized by age, and there were some ancient seal scripts that ordinary cultivators wouldn't be able to read at all, unless they hailed from powerful immortal sects with the relevant inheritances. That being the case, how could this young outsider recognize the characters Dragon Gate, which were written in ancient seal script on the stone steel? The scholar chuckled to himself. This underground cave was truly a good location to fight to the death. The scholar felt a splitting headache after he woke up, and he discovered that he was located next to a steep cliff. There was a suspension bridge that looked like a long snake nearby, and the bridge swayed slightly in the mountain wind. His 100-eye Taotai Dao robe was already gone, and the secret talisman hidden inside his sleeve had naturally fallen into Chun Haoran's hands as well. Moreover, he was bound by a golden demon-binding chain, and glancing down, he could tell that the grade of this treasure was quite high. It was actually crafted from 2 whiskers of a flood dragon, and the age of the flood dragon definitely wasn't low. Comparing the so-called flood dragon whiskers of Copper Green Lake Silver Carp to the flood dragon whiskers of the demon binding chain was probably the same as comparing Lady Bishu to a genuine toad from the Moon Palace, right? Perhaps the gulf wasn't so great, but it wouldn't be too far off either. The scholar couldn't help but chuckle in speechlessness. He didn't put up any struggle at all. This was because 2 bonded flying swords were guarding him, one pointing at his glabella from in front and one pointing at his heart from behind. Fortunately, he hadn't woken up from the soul-returning lotus flower light in his clan's ancestral hall. That would have been the worst-case scenario. The scholar sighed and said, Brother Haoran, remember to return what you've borrowed afterward. Not far away, a young wanderer wearing a bamboo hat was sitting cross-legged on the cliff and practicing the sword furnace stance. Brother Haoran, your hobby of taking clothes off other people isn't very good, the scholar continued. Was I correct in saying that the dragon robe worn by that ruler we found in Lady Bishu's treasure chamber disintegrated at a single touch? And I genuinely didn't lie to you about the Dao robe worn by that female cultivator from the Lofty Morals sect either. It's extremely ordinary, and it's only a spirit tool like that ritual wine bowl from the ancestral hall of the Lofty Morals sect. It won't fetch a good price, and you'll only make some money if you come across a cultivator who likes to collect Dao robes. Chun Ping'an continued to remain silent. However, the scholar didn't get angry or embarrassed at all. He had only lost a Dao robe that he couldn't show in public anyway, and it wasn't as if he had been stripped naked or anything. Even so, it did pain him slightly to lose those 3 golden paper talismans. One talisman was called the Jade Heaven Residence Talisman, and it belonged to a branch of the Mountain Talismans. This talisman could summon the residents of a Thunder City true king, and cultivators would be able to block several attacks from the bonded immortal treasures of nascent tier cultivators if they hid inside this residence. Meanwhile, golden core tier cultivators would most likely need more than 7 or 8 minutes to breach the entrance of the summoned residence. Another talisman was called the Pure Jade Illumination Talisman, and activating this talisman could illuminate the darkness and suppress the demons and ghosts. This talisman had an extremely wide area of effect, and it could envelop an area of several kilometers in radius. It didn't target cultivators, however, and it was especially used for breaking through formations and encirclements. The final talisman was the most valuable one, and it was a secret among secrets in the scholar's clan. It was called the Cloud-Slashing Fiend Talisman, and the talismanic core contained 4 specks of incredibly valuable divine light. Upon activating this talisman, the Thunder Guardian, Lightning Goddess, Rain God, and Wind Deity would all appear in unison to launch one combined attack. This was the talisman that the scholar had been pinching when standing in the backyard of Peeling Mountain's Moon Hall. However, Chen Ping'an had also been equally as sneaky at that time, and he had similarly made some subtle movements inside his sleeve. The scholar had been unsure about Chen Ping'an's strength, and the two of them had also been too close. As such, he hadn't been willing to risk heavy injuries to defeat his opponent, what with the excessive might of the talisman being able to obliterate half of Peeling Mountain. Moreover, using the talisman would have also exposed his whereabouts. It was because of these reasons that the scholar had suppressed his killing intent. As for the talisman that had been destroyed by Chen Ping'an, it also possessed strong destructive ability, although it didn't appear as mighty and magnificent as the Cloud-Slashing Fiend Talisman. At the same time, this talisman wasn't a secret of his clan, and it was instead the pinnacle talisman of a talisman sect in the northern complete reed continent that was especially used for targeting sword cultivators. In other words, the scholar hadn't actually been backed into a corner by the group of demons at the time, and he had merely appeared disheveled on the surface. The scholar's true goal had been to purposely cause some huge commotion that was visible from the mountain ranges, and this was because he was certain that Chen Haoran would definitely sneak back in secret and quietly hide at some place. Afterward, Chen Haoran might look for an opportunity to launch a deadly sneak attack on him. However, had the scholar not purposely appeared weak on the surface in order to lure Chen Haoran in, giving him the opportunity to kill his opponent? However, it was a shame that things hadn't gone his way. The opposing forces were truly always one step ahead. Chen Haoran's sword was very strange. Far too strange. The scholar's golden paper Earth Ancestor Palace sword-locking talisman had surprisingly failed to bind his opponent's sword, and as a result, the Earth movement technique and the Cloud-Slashing Fiend talisman that he had prepared were deprived of the opportunity to shine. Otherwise, if his first talisman had succeeded and he were able to use his second talisman and escape through the earth, then Chen Haoran would have suffered severe injuries even if he weren't directly killed. At that time, the scholar could have left him behind for the group of demons to deal with. Could Chen Haoran possibly survive that? At the same time, that person inside him had made things even worse, unexpectedly causing trouble at that moment and forcefully wresting control of half of his soul, going as far as to drop all defenses against Chen Haoran. And what was the outcome? Chen Haoran had ruthlessly struck him with a punch, and he had now been reduced to a captive. Thankfully, however, Chen Haoran hadn't decided to resolutely kill him and take his treasures before destroying his corpse to eliminate the evidence. Was this not some fortune that Chen Haoran had accumulated by choosing to be benevolent? Otherwise, if Chen Haoran had decided to kill him, the scholar would have still been able to stay alive and wake up in his clan. However, he would have paid a huge price and lost part of his spirit and soul, suffering damage to the foundation of his great Tao. Even though his clan had secret techniques to address this, it would still delay his cultivation and breakthrough by at least 100 years. At that time, how could his clan forgive Chen Haoran? To say nothing of pursuing him for tens of thousands of kilometers, his clan would pursue Chen Ping'an for tens upon hundreds of years, even if he were the direct disciple of a sect-level force on another continent. The lofty Cloud Palace's Yang clan, which belonged to the Great Origin Empire's esteemed mystery department, was widely recognized by the continent to be a clan that remembered acts of kindness and would repay them manifold. At the same time, they would remember acts of hostility for a long time and repay them with utmost ferocity. Be it the 3 golden paper talismans from the ancestral hall that he hadn't used, or be it the 100-eye Tao Tai Dao robe, could these items possibly be worth as much as the life and great Tao of a cultivator? As such, the scholar was very open-minded about losing them. His father always told him that he definitely needed to accept small losses on the path of cultivation. The scholar smiled and asked, "Brother Haoran, how did you break free from the encirclement of demons with me? You must have spent a lot of energy, didn't you?" After Qian Ping'an finished channeling the 18 stops technique, he exited the sword furnace stance and replied, I didn't need to spend much energy as the group of demons was already exhausted after fighting with you for so long. They were also afraid that there would be more reinforcements apart from me, so they all shrank back and refused to advance. As such, their so-called encirclement was nothing more than a perfunctory show. Even so, they still held me back for a while before I finally managed to find a gap to escape through, after which I fled south all the way until I reached this location of Malicious Ghost Valley. However, your Dao robe was snatched by those demons because I was unable to stop them in time, and I truly feel very guilty about this. Then this demon-binding chain and the 2 flying swords? The scholar asked with a bitter smile. I'm using them to protect you, of course, Qian Ping'an replied with a righteous expression. There are 2 great demons here, and they've been eyeing us off from the suspension bridge this entire time. There's a python spirit and a spider spirit, and I'm sure that you've already detected their presence as well. I was afraid of getting you killed while I concentrated on cultivation. The scholar glanced over at the suspension bridge, and there were indeed 2 pitiful spirits. However, to regard them as great demons? They weren't even able to assume human form yet, and it was already quite impressive that they hadn't fled dozens of kilometers in fright after seeing the demon-binding chain around him. Qian Ping'an smiled and continued, I was naturally afraid that you would refuse to listen to my explanations and immediately try to fight me upon waking up. At that time, wouldn't the misunderstandings between us deepen even more? Anyhow, can the 2 of us speak honestly with each other now? The scholar nodded and replied, Not only is Brother Howren a chivalrous person, but it's even more commendable that you're so cautious and thorough when doing things. I truly can't pick any fault with your actions. Qian Ping'an smiled faintly and said, Brother Mumao, can you reveal your surname now? We're brothers who have risked our lives and gone through thick and thin together, so it's not very good for you to conceal your surname, is it? There was a dazzling smile on the scholar's face as he replied in an extremely sincere voice. My surname is Yang, and my name is Mumao. I grew up in the Great Origin Empire's esteemed mystery department, and thanks to my decent aptitude and the fact that my ancestors have worked in the esteemed mystery department for many generations, I was fortunate enough to become an internal disciple of the lofty Cloud Palace. I traveled south after leaving home this time, and I was already short on immortal coins before I even reached Malicious Ghost Valley. As such, I plan to vanquish demons in Malicious Ghost Valley, both accumulating some hidden virtue and earning a small amount of money at the same time. That was, I can at least scrounge together a decent present for the birthday banquet of a king of the Great Origin Empire, who has a good relationship with the esteemed mystery department. Since Chen Howren recognized the character's Dragon Gate on the steel, he had most likely seen through the 3 talismans hidden inside his sleeve as well. With this in mind, the scholar, Yang Mumao, no longer treated Chen Howren as a fool, lest he become angry and reward him with another punch. There was a hint of a smile on Qian Ping'an's face as he said, As an outsider from another continent, even I've heard much about the greatness of the Great Origin Empire's esteemed mystery department. Say, is Brother Mumao familiar with Yang Ningxing, that innate Dao seed? Yang Mumao rolled his eyes and replied, As an internal disciple of the lofty Cloud Palace, how can I not be familiar with this widely renowned junior immortal? Not only am I familiar with him, but I'm even familiar with young Master Yang Ningxin who likes to travel around the world. I have a fairly good relationship with both of them. Of course, the 2 of them are lofty direct disciples of the Yang clan, so my relationship with these 2 brothers is only very shallow. We can't be regarded as good friends or anything. Qian Ping'an had a skeptical expression, but there was nothing Yang Mumao could do to clear up this doubt. After all, Chen Howren couldn't torture him and interrogate him, could he? However, if he truly chose that route, a single demon-binding chain and 2 flying swords wouldn't necessarily be enough to restrict him. You were playing around with that bunch of wild dogs before, and your purpose was to make me think that I had an opportunity to kick you while you were down, so you could turn around and kill me instead? Qian Ping'an suddenly asked. Yang Mumao was just about to spin a story, but he suddenly furrowed his brows as a piercing pain struck his glabella. His entire aura changed the next moment, and he was filled with so-called pure yang righteous energy, as he had claimed when meeting Qian Ping'an for the first time. Qi refiners and pure martial artists could conceal their presence or change their auras, but it would be incredibly difficult to disguise the aura of one's spirit, that was imperceptibly formed. Qian Ping'an frowned and asked, "Are you suffering from soul separation syndrome? Are there two of you fighting for the same soul?" This was similar to two brothers continually arguing and fighting with each other inside their house. Generally speaking, this was a huge taboo for cultivators. If a qi refiner suffered from soul separation syndrome, then trying to break through to the subsequent cultivation tiers would be like someone with crippled legs trying to climb a mountain. Reaching the golden core tier was already extremely fortunate, but trying to overcome the mental demons of the nascent tier would be nothing more than an unrealistic dream. Yang Mumao sat up straight with his eyes clear and limpid as he smiled faintly and replied, "You suffered some injuries and expended a lot of energy to rescue me, and the golden paper land-shortening talisman that you used in the end was not only precious, but it likely also has some links to the talisman branch of my clan. That being the case, you can keep the 100-eyed Tao Tai Dao robe and the 3 talismans inside its sleeve as a thank you gift. As for me, I'm naturally not called Yang Mumao or whatnot. However, I am indeed from the Great Origin Empire's esteemed mystery department. I won't tell you my real name, but you can feel free to guess. When he loses consciousness in your body, you can actually still remain conscious and observe the outside world?" Qian Ping'an asked in puzzlement. The scholar nodded in response, but he didn't offer any further explanation. "But wanting to kill me is a genuine desire of yours," Qian Ping'an said. "And is the same not true for you?" the scholar asked with a smile. This chapter is updated by novelfire.net. Qian Ping'an remained silent. "Since you eventually decided to rescue me instead of kill me, I felt like it was necessary for me to come out to meet you one more time," the scholar continued. "In my view, battles of the Great Tao should be fair and square. If you agree with this, then we can choose a day after we finish our training to fight to the death on Temper Mountain. What do you say? Oh, and also, I need to warn you that I have a nagging feeling that someone is keeping an eye on you from afar in malicious Ghost Valley. Their observation of you is on and off, and it doesn't last for long each time. Their cultivation base is also profound, and I can only vaguely determine that they're located somewhere in the north. You need to be careful." Qian Ping'an didn't offer a comment on this. The scholar smiled and said, "I'm going to concentrate on refining the Dragon Gate steel now, and I must do so without any external distractions. You can interact with the other me, so I ask you to please bear with him. How should I put this? He can be regarded as the evil in my heart, and even though I've already compressed him to the size of a seemingly tiny seed, he's still extremely big in reality and also very pure. His evil is pure and he acts in an unrestrained manner, and there's no need to beat around the bush about this. However, every time I need to focus on something else and hand him control of this body, I make sure to place restrictions on him and prevent him from overstepping the boundaries too much. Oh, that's right. I can also observe the situation without restrictions when he's in control, and I can borrow these opportunities to observe Tao and temper my mind. On the other hand, he can only slumber when I'm in control of the body." Qian Ping'an's heart shuddered, and he was just about to say something in reply. However, the young scholar had already closed his eyes. Qian Ping'an quickly returned Sword Immortal to its scabbard after leaving the territory of Sheep Intestine Palace, and he hovered down to a mountain peak that was covered in thick miasma. He had scanned this area from above just then, and he would likely be able to reach the tall city walls of Copper Stench City once he left this mountain range and traveled southeast for approximately 25 kilometers. Once he reached Copper Stench City, then the Flax Robe Sect's Green Cottage town wouldn't be far away either. Emulating the sword flight of immortals was a very interesting thing. The seas of clouds in the world were ever-changing, and Qian Ping'an never grew tired of enjoying such views. He could also use these opportunities to alleviate his boredom. When leaving Sheep Intestine Palace just then, Qian Ping'an had purposely flown below a sea of clouds whose bottom layer appeared extremely straight as if it had been cut by a knife. As he slowly flew forward, only his head had poked into the sea of clouds, with the rest of his body remaining outside. If some ghost or spirit on the mountains below had looked up and witnessed this scene, they would have most likely thought, was this headless chi refiner okay in the head? Apart from these childish and laughable forms of self-entertainment, Qian Ping'an also liked to sink into the seas of clouds with only his head sticking out the top. He would then flap his arms as if he were swimming. In reality, these forms of entertainment were very similar to Pei Qian placing her head on the counters in the 2 shops in Dragon Riding Alley. This was as expected of a master and his disciple. The desolate mountain range was sparsely populated, and the trees in the mountain forest were full of knots and all kinds of other sicknesses. When walking past a mountain cliff, he looked up and saw a skinny bayberry tree growing from the cracks in the stone. Clouds and smoke swirled around the cliff, and at the bottom of the cliff was a large pile of crushed bones. This bayberry tree was most likely a tree spirit that had the potential to cultivate further and become more powerful. It had gained some sentience, and it had already learned to hunt small birds and small animals. Generally speaking, it was the most difficult for trees and plants to become spirits. When these spirits managed to assume human form, the vast majority of them would have already reached the end of their cultivation path. For example, the adorable little spirits that had stood on the potted tree in the green beetle shop, located at the Watercombing Nation's ferry station, were destined to have no chance at cultivation. They could only rely on the innately long lifespan of trees and plants to while away their time. These kinds of spirits were usually raised by cultivators simply because they looked adorable and joyous. Before the jewel small world had plummeted to the ground, the elders standing under the locust tree in the small town had liked to tell those fictional stories about ghosts and fiends in the mountain forests and marshes. They had purposely tricked and frightened the young children. However, the elders would usually also say that it was already a rare fortune to become a human, so they needed to cherish their lives as much as they could. Otherwise, if they took things for granted and didn't become a good person, then they would reincarnate as pigs or dogs in their future life. When Chen Pingyan was little, he had liked to squat in the distance to listen to these stories. Meanwhile, the fearless Lu Xianying had never liked listening to these things, always saying that these stories about ghosts and gods were nothing more than lies. As such, it had often been Gukan accompanying Chen Pingyan in the locust shade, and he would only stand up and leave when that auntie in Clay Vase Alley shouted loudly for him to eat or go to bed. Chen Pingyan leaped onto the stone cliff with his fingers like hooks as they stabbed into the cliff face. He hung in the air just like that, and he retrieved 3 snowflake coins and held them in his hand, using the refinement mantra that the water goddess of the burial river had bestowed upon him to refine the spiritual energy contained within the snowflake coins into drops of emerald green water droplets. If the Tao partners who were desperate for immortal coins for the sake of survival had arrived here and seen this peculiar bayberry tree, perhaps their first thought would have been curiosity about the value of the tree. In the end, they would have mustered their courage and risked their safety to scale up the mountain cliff to cut down the bayberry tree, with the sound of their blades reverberating through the desolate mountains. As for whether the fated opportunity of the bayberry tree itself would be severed because of their actions, would they have any time or effort to worry about such matters? If their cultivation were a bit higher and they were still desperate for immortal coins, would they not engage in a battle of life and death no inferior to a battle of the great Tao if they encountered the 2 spirits on the suspension bridge? Chen Pingyan never resented those cultivators for engaging in life and death battles to advance their cultivation. In fact, Chen Pingyan could understand them even if they used more ruthless techniques. However, Chen Pingyan disliked and even loathed those people who were already lofty immortals standing atop the mountains and enjoying a myriad of benefits, appearing life paramount flood dragons hidden in the sea of clouds, yet they still failed to show an ounce of pity toward the mortal world. In their eyes, those who were weaker than them were nothing more than mere ants whom they could casually crush on a whim. After killing those whom they deemed eyesores, they would nonchalantly remark that the great Tao was heartless, thereby allowing them to safeguard their Tao heart. Just what kind of Tao were they cultivating? Walking through the mountain forest by himself, Chen Pingyan murmured, "Are the things that I dislike necessarily wrong? Chen Pingyan, do you not find yourself a bit too haughty and domineering? Just who in the world do you think you are? Those who are benevolent can't lead an army effectively, and those who are too virtuous can't manage wealth properly. Is this correct?" Chen Pingyan asked himself. Chen Pingyan shook his head in response. Chen Pingyan felt like a lot of people only quoted things in halves, with the quotes not being genuine words of enlightenment. Some sayings were quoted out of context and held up as guiding principles for how to cultivate oneself and interact with the world. But these sayings could indeed help people avoid many difficulties and hardships in life. As such, these misquoted sayings weren't necessarily bad, but they were ultimately blemished and imperfect. For example, the books also said this: "Those who are benevolent can't lead an army effectively, but after obtaining great power and influence, a general must show great benevolence." 1. Those who are too virtuous can't manage wealth properly, but after obtaining great fortune and riches, one must show great virtue. Qian Ping'an stopped and leaped onto a high branch, retrieving his carving knife and a bamboo slip, 2 items that he hadn't touched for a very long time, as he sat on the tree. He then inscribed these 2 sentences onto the bamboo slip. After thinking for a moment, he also engraved the sentence regarding cultivating the heart and cultivating strength that he had said to the small rat spirit at Sheep Intestine Palace on another bamboo slip. Qian Ping'an put away his carving knife and held 1 bamboo slip in each hand, raising them high into the air as he said with a dazzling smile, "Now these are genuinely sayings from the books." As it turned out, these were principles that Qian Ping'an had made up by himself. 3. Casting one's gaze over the entire world, perhaps only those masters of flattery at Downtrodden Mountain would be willing to take these sayings seriously, right? Qian Ping'an was in a brilliant mood as he carefully put the 2 bamboo slips away. Afterward, Qian Ping'an was in no rush to make his way to Copper Stench City. Moreover, after taking a few sips of wine, there was still quite a lot of wine left in the wine pot that he had taken out at Sheep Intestine Palace. Qian Ping'an started to carefully take inventory of his belongings in his mind. He had enjoyed a bountiful yield after entering Malicious Ghost Valley from Skeleton Shoal. However, the loss of his springgrass Dao robe wasn't a small one, and Qian Ping'an estimated that it would cost at least 5,000 to 6,000 snowflake coins to completely repair. When breaking free from the encirclement of demons with Yang Ningxing at Gushing Earth Mountain, Qian Ping'an had purposely suppressed the breath of true qi in his body in order to conceal his strength to the demons and the scholar. He hadn't dared to reveal the fact that he was a pure martial artist too early. As such, he had relied solely on his Dao robe to withstand a powerful hammer attack from the mountain-moving great sage. Afterward, he had battled against the Imperial Thunder Divine General at Accumulating Cloud Mountain and stayed in the manifestation of the Thunder Pool for a long time, causing the springgrass Dao robe to suffer severe damage as it was endlessly pummeled by the powerful bolts of lightning. Qian Ping'an felt slightly irritated about having to spend so much to repair his Dao robe. In the end, he could only console himself by saying, "Even the smallest cloth wrapper shops in the world need to spend some capital to do business. I shouldn't have this mindset of making a fortune without spending a single copper coin." Moreover, standing in the thunder pool had been like using flames and boiling oil to temper his body and soul. This was what he had come here for, training at Malicious Ghost Valley. Even though the effectiveness had been slightly inferior to what Qian Ping'an was accustomed to in Downtrodden Mountain's bamboo building, he had still benefited greatly. Moreover, thunder pools were the most torturous prisons in heaven and earth to begin with, so enduring this hardship had come with other mystical benefits. In fact, Qian Ping'an could already sense that his muscles, bones, and soul had become slightly tougher than before. He had snatched the snowflake Dao robe from Meticulous Skin City's Lady Bai at Crow Peak, and according to the words of City Lord Fan Yun Luo, this Dao robe was worth 2 to 3 grain rain coins on the market. If he sold the Dao robe back to Meticulous Skin City, he would most likely make a premium of 1 to 2 grain rain coins. However, Qian Ping'an immediately felt gloomy upon thinking of Lady Bai, someone who liked to play mind games on other people. She had manifested a certain appearance to tempt Qian Ping'an at the time, causing him to feel both extremely furious and slightly guilty at the same time. Apart from the 5 skeletons that Qian Ping'an had asked the lower 5-tier Dao partners to bring out of Malicious Ghost Valley, there were also the dozen or so jade-like skeletons of the female officials and attendants from Meticulous Skin City in his minimization treasure. Regarding how much he could sell these skeletons for at Skeleton Shoal after he left Malicious Ghost Valley, Qian Ping'an had no clue or confidence at all. Upon thinking of this, Qian Ping'an couldn't help but look toward the south, wondering about whether the Dao partners had sold the 5 skeletons for a good price. The so-called promise of 1 month was nothing more than an excuse. Qian Ping'an had never taken this promise seriously, and he had simply used it as an excuse for the Dao partners to feel at ease when they took the immortal coins after 1 month. In fact, he didn't even care whether the Dao partners who were struggling greatly to make money in Malicious Ghost Valley waited for a full month at the Market of Helpless Pass. This was because Qian Ping'an wouldn't show himself at the Market of Helpless Pass regardless of whether the Dao partners waited for a full month or not after selling the 5 skeletons from Meticulous Skin City. If they didn't wait for a month and fled with the money, then they would need to continuously worry about being caught by him. This would weigh on their minds to some extent. Of course, it would naturally be best if they waited for a month, as they would be able to feel justified and at ease when they left with the immortal coins. The female cultivator at the 5th tier would be able to advance to the abode tier of the middle 5 tiers, and there would presumably still be many immortal coins left over to help her stabilize her cultivation base. As for the immortal coins left over after that, it was up to fate and the will of the heavens whether the male cultivator could also break through as well. As for why Chen Ping'an had done this, the answer was very simple. This was similar to how Chen Ping'an had insisted on retrieving the skeletons of the emperor and his lover, who were holding hands in death in the underground treasure chamber of Lady Bishu. He hadn't done this for the sake of seeking wealth, and he most certainly hadn't coveted the skeletons of the Longxi nation's emperor and the lofty moral sex female cultivator. Rather, his only thought was to find their home nation and bury them together amid the green mountains and limpid waters. He wished for the lovers in the world to remain together forever, and he wished for the lovers who were loyal until death to remain together in the afterlife. The path of the Great Tao was extremely long, as was the journey to reach longevity and immortality. While cultivating, Chen Ping'an had earnestly practiced fist techniques and sword techniques and expressed no fear for fighting against powerful foes. In addition to this, he had also insisted on stopping in his tracks to do many little things that other people were largely unwilling to do. Was this not a great joy of life? When visiting Peeling Mountain's Moon Hall, he had obtained treasures at both Lady Bishu's residence and her treasure chamber. He had obtained more than 1,000 snowflake coins from the scholar Yang Ningxing. However, Chen Ping'an felt like the most valuable treasure was the piece of frost iron that had been used as an entrance mechanism, a miniature moon palace that had been meticulously forged by the mechanists of the Mahist sect. As for the jars and vials that Chen Ping'an had retrieved from Lady Bishu's room, he actually regarded them with quite some importance as well. After all, heavens knew whether he would come across some noble lady from a large clan or a celestial maiden from the mountains who had too much money when he left Skeleton Shoal and continued to travel north. Perhaps they would suddenly be blinded by impulse and purchase these jars and vials for a high price? After all, Zhu Lian had said with confidence that there wasn't a single woman in the world who didn't want to become more beautiful. If there was, then this was simply because they hadn't come across a man who was worthy of them developing such thoughts yet. As for the large box of military books, hidden by the demon-hunting immortal at the end of the underground passageway of Sheep Intestine Palace, Chen Ping'an hadn't had the time to carefully read these books yet, and he planned to flick through them one by one after he arrived at Green Cottage Town and settled down. These were probably books that had been left behind at Skeleton Shoal by the 2 great empires and their dozen or so vassal states, and they had been stored in the Sheep Intestine Palace for 1,000 years afterward. And now these military books were part of Chen Ping'an's assets, but he still needed to carefully select the best ones to add to his collection at Downtrodden Mountain in the future. Chen Ping'an could almost imagine a disciple of Downtrodden Mountain entering the scripture library to borrow books in the future. The elder looking after the scripture library would tell the disciple that these were books that the mountain master had obtained from Skeleton Shoal during his distant journey to the northern complete reed continent in the past, and the elder would further embellish the story and remind the disciple to be extremely careful when reading the book. After all, these were treasures that the mountain master had retrieved from the perilous dens of ghosts and demons. At that time, would the disciple feel like they needed to be more earnest and studious when they read the book? And when they became tired after reading for a long time, would they more or less feel some admiration toward their mountain master who had traversed countless mountains and rivers at such a young age? Sitting on the tall branch, Chen Ping'an involuntarily started to chuckle to himself. He continued to take inventory of his belongings. He was still a young bookkeeper dressed in azure, but he had only been able to think about how to lose less during his time at Bamboo Scroll Lake. Meanwhile, he could think about how to earn more during his time in Malicious Ghost Valley. Things were truly getting better and better. He had obtained 5 golden lightning whips of varying sizes at Accumulating Cloud Mountain, the territory of the Imperial Thunder Divine General. These were rare natural treasures, and Chen Ping'an was temporarily unaware of how much these golden lightning whips were truly worth. However, why had the demon with the 2 golden eagle heads accused him of stealing the thunder pool before? Chen Ping'an was worried about there being significant unforeseen events at Accumulating Cloud Mountain because of this. so he purposely took a detour around the mountain after he left the Black River. In reality, he could investigate further at accumulating Cloud Mountain if he were genuinely unafraid of death, and he might even come away with some unexpected rewards. The same was true for the old Dragon Cave. Of course, doing so would be emulating the decisions of the Dao partners who both had a low cultivation base. He would be gambling with his life for the sake of making some money. Inside the water goddess shrine on the bank of the Black River, he had sat together with the scholar to split up the treasures that the scholar had obtained from the underwater cave abode of the sea-turning primordial lord. He had obtained 6 spirit tools. At the same time, Qian Pingyan had forsaken the jade hairpin immortal treasure, and only taken the pitiful 800 snowflake coins. He had also taken a pile of trash and trinkets that the scholar had conveniently swept into his minimization treasure, similar to the jars and vials that he had obtained at Lady Bishu's residence. Even though he was aware that his great Dao had affinity with water after returning to Downtrodden Mountain from Bamboo Scroll Lake, Qian Pingyan had still turned down the immortal treasure that was specifically beneficial to cultivators who possessed a strong affinity with water. It was indeed the case that fortune would sometimes fall from the heavens and smack one on the head. However, Qian Pingyan couldn't bring himself to trust the scholar, a speck of the purest evil that the esteemed mystery department's Yang Ningxing had condensed from all of the evil in his heart using a mystical Dao power. Even so, Qian Pingyan was very curious about this unique Dao power of the lofty Cloud Palace's Yang Ningxing. How had he managed to refine his heart and his mind as if he were refining a physical item? After taking inventory of his belongings, Qian Pingyan was surprised to discover that he had obtained so much new wealth during his journey through Malicious Ghost Valley. Qian Pingyan had also noticed the shattering mountains and waters at Treasure Mirror Mountain while traveling to Green Cottage Town, and it was extremely likely that Yang Chongxian had finally obtained the fated opportunity of the treasure mirror. Meanwhile, someone had also obtained a huge fated opportunity by secretly stealing the thunder pool of accumulating Cloud Mountain. However, Qian Pingyan didn't feel like he would become envious because of other people's bountiful yields. The scholar had been scheming the entire time, yet he had still lost to Qian Pingyan time and time again. In reality, however, he would leave Malicious Ghost Valley with an impressive yield even when disregarding the 3-mountain mirror that Yang Ningxin had worked so hard to obtain for him. He had obtained the golden luo fish from the old dragon cave, and had also obtained the ancestor coin personally crafted by a mighty hidden immortal of the lofty moral sect. Just these 2 treasures alone could be regarded as a bountiful yield. However, knowing the truth still didn't bother Qian Pingyan in the least. He would continue to walk his own path as others embarked on their paths of riches. They could obtain their huge fate opportunities, and he would continue to collect his trash and trinkets. Qian Pingyan suddenly chuckled to himself, with his smile so wide that it couldn't be concealed. The more trash and trinkets the better, he remarked delightedly. He then shook his sleeve and continued. In any case, you guys aren't trash and trinkets at all. You're piles and piles of immortal coins. Moreover, the 100-eye Taotai Dao robe that he had snatched from Yang Ningxing still had 3 incredibly valuable-looking talismans inside its sleeve. Qian Pingyan jumped down from the tall branch, with his footsteps sprightly as he swung his large sleeves like Cui Dongshan. He even copied Pei Qian's manner of walking, perfectly capturing both the form and the essence. Qian Pingyan felt like he was indeed getting a bit too carried away at this moment. However, what did this matter? He was feeling very happy right now. The ancestral mountain of the Flax Robe sect was called the Wood Garment Mountain. This was a towering mountain, yet there was no extravagant structure on it, with the cultivators of the sect simply building thatched cottages in which to cultivate. However, there were few cultivators in the Flax Robe sect, so this caused the mountain to appear relatively quiet and deserted. There was only a single residence at the waist of the mountain with a plaque reading Form of Dao that could somewhat be regarded as an immortal attraction. This was a residence used for hosting and accommodating guests. Wood Garment Mountain was sealed off 3 days ago, and it no longer accepted any guests. Not only that, but the archway buildings at the entrance of Malicious Ghost Valley also started to enforce martial law, with cultivators who wanted to train in the mystical realm no longer being allowed to enter. From Helpless Pass to Mural City and then to the regions surrounding the Swaying River as well as the entire Skeleton Shoal, no one found this unreasonable in the least. This was because they had witnessed far more unreasonable things in the past. In the beginning, it was 3 paintings of the female heavenly officials in Mural City transforming into white outlines in a single day. However, this was nothing compared to the extraordinary events that took place afterward. Many cultivators at Skeleton Shoal were still wallowing in grief at the fact that 3 fated opportunities in Mural City had already been obtained by some other cultivators, yet not long after, they personally witnessed something that shook them to their cores. Late one night, a colossal skeleton suddenly materialized on the land of Skeleton Shoal, appearing like a towering mountain that couldn't be defeated. This was most likely the Tao manifestation of Gao Cheng, the city lord of malicious Ghost Valley's Skeleton Wall City, and it used its brute strength to tear a hole in the barrier of heaven and earth. This skeletal Tao manifestation should have obediently remained in the land of ghosts and entities. Yet after it appeared in the outside world, it naturally started to conflict with the great Tao of the Yang world. There was intense friction between the colossal skeleton and the spiritual energy of Skeleton Shoal, causing resplendent rays of light to flow into the surroundings and explode like the most dazzling fireworks. Amid this stunning backdrop, it appeared as if the colossal skeleton Tao manifestation were a primordial fire god, descending upon the mortal world. However, there was also a sword that was no weaker than the saber of the unpolished jade Tier Zhu Quan, with blades of brilliant sword qi originating from the ground and rapidly sweeping upward in an extremely straight and furious manner. The colossal Tao manifestation of City Lord Gao Cheng was leaning slightly to one side, and it appeared as if there were something else in malicious Ghost Valley inhibiting his advance. Even so, the colossal skeleton raised a palm high into the air before slamming it down, instantly giving rise to a thick sea of clouds that was filled with overwhelming energy and murderous aura. There were anguished wails amid the clouds, and it seemed as if hundreds of thousands of malicious ghosts and deceased souls were trapped inside and stripped of the chance to enter reincarnation, with these pitiful beings forced to struggle endlessly in a sea of pain. The sea of dark clouds rapidly bore down on the ancestral hall of the Flax Robe sect, soon after which, the mountain protection formation of the Flax Robe sect was activated. Thousands of armored puppets dashed out from Wood Garment Mountain, with each of them measuring more than 10 meters tall and suited in talismanic armor. Golden radiance and silver threads flowed around their bodies, and the sea of dark clouds was continually eaten away as these puppets launched themselves inside. Even so, the sea of dark clouds continued to rapidly descend upon the ancestral hall. On the ground in Wood Garment Mountain, wave after wave of armored heroic spirits charged forward to resist, and in the end thousands of mountain and water heroic spirit puppets crafted by the Flax Robe sect fell together with the sea of dark clouds. At the same time, a string of light emanated from the ancestral hall in Wood Garment Mountain and stretched down, appearing like an arc of lightning racing downward as it descended to the archway buildings and knitted an extremely radiant formation. A golden deity that measured 1,500 meters in height climbed out of the formation and stood up, holding a giant sword in its hand and swinging it horizontally at the colossal skeleton's waist. One strike wasn't enough to bring down the colossal Tao manifestation of Skeleton Wall City's Gao Cheng, so the golden deity quickly launched another sword strike from the border of malicious Ghost Valley and Skeleton Shoal. The colossal skeleton grabbed the sword with one hand, causing sparks of golden light to rain down on the earth. The entire Skeleton Shoal started to quake, and the colossal skeleton swung its arm and pushed the giant sword away. After doing this, its colossal body fell downward and instantly fused into the shadows on the ground, most likely retreating back to its territory in malicious Ghost Valley. The most update N0vels are published on novelire.net. The golden deity also retreated back to the formation, with the string of light returning to the ancestral hall in Wood Garment Mountain as well. The string of light condensed into a treasured jewel that rested in the mouth of a bronze flood dragon statue. Silence gradually returned to the night sky of Skeleton Shoal. Inside the immortal residence located at the waist of the mountain, Pang Lanshi, the young man whom the Flax Robe sect had extremely high hopes for, was sitting beside a stone table and intently observing the young wanderer sitting opposite him. Meanwhile, the latter continued to flick through a yellowing military book that he had looted from Sheep Intestine Palace. Even though Pang Lanshi was young, he possessed very high seniority in the Flax Robe sect as the only direct disciple of one of the old ancestors of the sect. Indeed, there were several golden courtier cultivators who needed to refer to him as junior uncle. As for those at the middle 5 tiers, they needed to go one step further and refer to him as ancestor junior uncle. Only a single guest had stayed at the residence over the past 3 days, that being the swordsman in azure sitting opposite him right now. Peng Lanqi had come here several times already, and out of curiosity, he had already chatted with the young wanderer and asked him some questions. The young wanderer was clearly very open and sincere, and he hadn't purposely avoided Peng Lanqi's questions or beat around the bush either. Even so, Peng Lanqi would always feel like nothing important was discussed when he mulled over their conversations afterward. It was very difficult to imagine that the person sitting in front of him was the same person who had appeared poor and stingy, and had shamelessly haggled over a painting with him at Mural City. At the time, Peng Lanqi's childhood sweetheart had even run out of the shop to remind this person that it was a huge taboo to reveal one's wealth when traveling through the cultivation world. As it turned out, they had both been completely fooled by this young wanderer. The old ancestor responsible for maintaining rule and order in the ancestral hall hadn't been willing to reveal the secret to Peng Lanqi, and he had simply said that these matters would be discussed when the sect leader returned to Wood Garment Mountain. After saying this, however, he had sighed with emotion and remarked that this young man was truly quite capable to have escaped from Gao Cheng's grasp in malicious Ghost Valley with his middling cultivation base. After hearing this, Peng Lanqi had grown even more curious about what exactly had taken place in malicious Ghost Valley. Just how had the person in front of him provoked the city lord of Skeleton Wall City? Qian Ping'an put down the military book penned by a past general of the Divine Strategy Nation, and after recalling a matter, he smiled and asked, Lanqi, the 8 wall paintings in Mural City have already transformed into white sketches, so what are you going to do about your shops near the paintings of the Deer Rider Divine Maiden, the Hanging Inkstone Divine Maiden, and the Rainbringer Divine Maiden? Peng Lanqi also felt slightly troubled, and he replied in helplessness, what else can I do? Xingzi is almost worried to death, and she said that we definitely won't get much business in the future. Now that Mural City has lost the 3 fated opportunities pertaining to the female heavenly officials, there's no doubt that the number of visitors will drop off a cliff. But what else can I do? I could only console her and repeat some of the grand principles that I heard from my senior brothers and my junior nieces and nephews. However, Xingzi unexpectedly didn't appreciate this, and she even got angry with me and started to give me the silent treatment instead. Qian Ping'an, why is Xingzi acting? I was clearly trying to console her and help, so why is she still unhappy with me? Qian Ping'an smiled faintly and asked, do you want to know why this is? Of course I do, Peng Lanqi replied with a nod. Qian Ping'an's smile grew even wider as he said, Lanqi, I've heard that your great-grandfather still has a few complete box sets of the mural replicas of the heavenly officials. Moreover, these are your great-grandfather's proudest works, the ones that he worked the longest and most earnestly to complete in his life. Peng Lanqi faltered for a moment before saying resolutely, I'll steal these mural replicas for you as long as you help me clear up my confusion. Qian Ping'an was left slightly speechless, and he gestured for Peng Lanqi, who had already stood up, to hurry up and sit down. A noble person seizes not the favored items of others, and I don't covet those sets of mural replicas either. I simply hope that you can convince your great-grandfather to pick up his calligraphy brush again, and draw 1 or 2 sets of mural replicas that aren't too much worse than his best ones. I'm willing to spend money to buy these, and I'm not asking you to steal anything from your great-grandfather. 1 set is enough, 2 sets is better, and 3 sets is naturally the best. That's all? Peng Lanqi asked in a slightly suspicious voice. Qian Ping'an nodded in response. Peng Lanqi was still slightly hesitant, and he said, there are advantages and disadvantages to stealing, with the disadvantage being that I'll definitely be scolded and might even receive a beating. The advantage is that this will be a quick and straightforward transaction. On the other hand, stubbornly trying to convince my great-grandfather to pick up his calligraphy brush and earnestly draw again is a fairly challenging task. From the top to the bottom, everyone in the Flax Robe sect has experienced the strange temper of my great-grandfather before. He always says that the more earnestly he draws and the more accurately the heavenly officials are depicted in his drawings, the more he'll be offending and defiling them if the mural replicas are purchased by vulgar men in the world. Qian Ping'an nodded and said, sincerity is the key to success, and your great-grandfather might not have been able to capture the true essence of the heavenly officials if he hadn't possessed this foundation of sincerity. Otherwise, would it be difficult for so-called masterful painters to observe the murals and replicate their brilliance? In the end, however, why were your great-grandfather's mural replicas the most spirited and lively? This is because of his untainted heart, something that perhaps the 8 heavenly officials all noticed in the past. It was this state of mind that allowed your great-grandfather to create magic with his calligraphy brush. Peng Lanqi blinked as he listened. Was this the truth? Or were these mere words of flattery? Outside the residence, there stood a tall and sturdy old man with white hair and a brush and an inkstone hanging by his waist. He turned around to look at his good friend, an old ancestor of the flax robe sect who was just retracting his palm. With this little boy's cultivation base, he shouldn't be aware of our eavesdropping, should he? The white-haired old man asked. The old ancestor of the flax robe sect smiled and replied, I helped you conceal your aura, so he shouldn't be aware of our presence. However, there are a myriad of immortal techniques in the world, so it's always possible for there to be surprises. The fact that he was able to escape from malicious Ghost Valley also means that he can't be judged through ordinary lenses. The white-haired old man stroked his beard and chuckled. No matter what, his words resonated deeply with me. The old ancestor of the flax robe sect was none other than the person who had followed Zhang Shangzhen into the mystical realm of the mural before, and he asked, Can you truly bring yourself to sell those mural replicas? Peng Lanqi's great-grandfather, Peng Shanliang, had once made a grand vow during his youth, saying that he would paint all of the majestic mountains in the world. However, he had settled down at the flax robe sect for some unknown reason afterward, causing him to put this ambition on hold. Then let's observe them for a while longer? I want to see how this little boy from outside provides guidance to Lanqi. Peng Lanqi replied in a quiet voice. The old ancestor frowned and said in displeasure, He's a guest of the flax robe sect, and it was only because I couldn't endure your pestering just then that I channeled a minor mystical ability to eavesdrop on their conversation. However, eavesdropping any further will completely go against the hospitality manners of the flax robe sect. Peng Shanliang widened his eyes and exclaimed, Lanqi has already lost the fated opportunity pertaining to the dear rider divine maiden, so if he faces bumps and obstacles with his romantic life as well, then let's see if Lanqi's master will give you a severe scolding. He's indeed very impressive when it comes to scolding people, but I'm more powerful than he is when it comes to beating people. When has it not been the case that he'll feel extremely content for a brief moment after scolding someone, yet he'll end up recuperating in bed for one entire month afterward? The old ancestor snickered. Peng Shanliang suddenly smiled and said, I'll give you a set of yellow paper mural replicas when we return, a set that can be regarded as brilliantly beautiful. The old ancestor of the flax robe sect raised his palm and activated his observation technique again, saying with a faint smile, I was waiting for you to say this. However, you always drag your feet and beat around the bush first. The old ancestor retracted his mystical ability surprisingly quickly this time, causing Peng Shanliang to ask in puzzlement, Why did you stop? The young man is getting a bit displeased, so we'd better stop before things get out of hand, the old ancestor replied with a smile. Otherwise, I'll suffer greatly if he goes and complains to the sect leader afterward. There was such huge commotion in malicious Ghost Valley, and Gao Cheng was finally pushed to summon his Tao manifestation after so much difficulty, even leaving his territory and appearing at Skeleton Shoal. However, our sect leader surprisingly only managed to shave off 100 years of his cultivation after not only attacking herself, but even activating the mountain protection formation of our sect. Sect leader will definitely be feeling very terrible when she returns to the sect this time. Peng Shanliang felt slightly anxious. Malicious Ghost Valley had become comprehensively sealed off from the outside world these past 2 days, and even though all of the bonded candles in the ancestral hall were still ablaze, signifying that the cultivators of the flax robe sect guarding Green Cottage Town and Orchid Scent Town were still alive, heavens knew whether Gao Cheng would suddenly descend into a fit of rage and decide to assure mutual destruction with the flax robe sect. At that time, the 1,000-year standoff between Skeleton Shoal and malicious Ghost Valley would be shattered in an instant, and Peng Shanliang was afraid that there would suddenly come a tragic moment when the bonded candles in the ancestral hall were extinguished one after another. Moreover, the speed at which the candles would be extinguished would definitely be very quick. No one could say for sure how many bonded candles would remain burning at the end, and even sect leader Zhu Quan and the golden courtier Du Wenxi weren't safe from the danger of death. If a bloody battle truly took place at malicious Ghost Valley, Then, judging by the personalities and demeanors of the cultivators from the Flax Robe sect, it was entirely likely that the bonded candles of these powerful cultivators would actually be extinguished first. The old ancestor guessed Pang Shanling's thoughts, and he consoled with a smile. Gao Cheng will definitely be filled with explosive fury after suffering wounds to his vital energy. This is completely understandable. However, there are still a few pieces of good news coming out from malicious Ghost Valley. The person who launched the sword strikes back then was none other than White Cage City's Pu Rang, and the nascent tier heroic spirit who was once a general of the Divine Strategy Nation has always been opposed to Skeleton Wall City. When the barrier of the mystical realm was torn open before, I saw him intentionally targeting Gao Cheng as well. Don't forget, there's also the Peachtree Forest in malicious Ghost Valley that has the two mighty figures residing in the temple and the monastery. They won't allow Gao Cheng to wantonly slaughter those in the mystical realm either. Pang Shanling nodded lightly and said, "Let's hope that this is the case." Meanwhile, inside the immortal residence, Pang Lanqi had no time to worry about anything else, deciding that Xingzi, his childhood sweetheart, was the most important. "All right, go on," he said to Chen Ping'an. "However, the condition is that I have to find your advice reasonable. Otherwise, I won't go to my great-grandfather to ask for a scolding either." Chen Ping'an raised his hands and cupped his fists first, gesturing to the powerful immortals standing outside to not take things too far. He then lightly placed a hand on the military book and gently ran his palm across it. It was only after leaving malicious Ghost Valley that he had discovered that the books meticulously curated and collected by the demon-hunting immortal of Sheep Intestine Palace were largely well-maintained and in exceptional condition. These were valuable copies or even loan copies that had already existed in the world for 1,000 years. This greatly improved Chen Ping'an's mood, and he started to offer advice to the young man in front of him, saying with a quiet chuckle, "Lanqi, do you think it's difficult for you to advance to the Golden Core tier and become a so-called terrestrial immortal in the eyes of mortal people?" "I'm not bragging or anything, Chen Ping'an, but advancing to the Golden Core tier will be easy, and advancing to the nascent tier won't be difficult either," Pang Lanqi replied sincerely. Chen Ping'an nodded in response, knowing that Pang Lanqi was simply speaking the truth. Having stayed at this immortal residence of the Flax Robe sect for a few days, and having chatted with this young man as well as a few direct disciples of the sect including the Golden Courtier Yang Lin, Chen Ping'an was roughly aware of Pang Lanqi's standing in the Flax Robe sect already. It was extremely likely that he was being raised as a future sect leader. At the very least, he was going to wield great power in the Flax Robe sect. Moreover, Pang Lanqi possessed outstanding talent, had a pure heart, and also treated others kindly. As such, his innate aptitude and his connate personality were all extremely compatible with the Flax Robe sect. This was the mysterious nature of the Great Tao. If Pang Lanqi were born in Bamboo Scroll Lake, then perhaps his achievements would be greatly limited if he remained the same as he was right now. This was because Bamboo Scroll Lake would continue to grind away at his personality, thereby dragging down his cultivation base and his ability to obtain fated opportunities. However, it was a completely different story at the Flax Robe sect's Wood Garment Mountain, where Pang Lanqi was like a fish in water. It was as if they were a match made in heaven. This was a case of different environments producing different kinds of people. As such, there were some cases where complaining about fate and other people wasn't completely unfounded. After all, there were indeed some people who were born in the wrong place at the wrong time. Seeing Chen Ping'an's mind start to wander, Pang Lanqi couldn't help but interrupt and say, "Stop daydreaming, Chen Ping'an. There are one or two sets of mural replicas waving their hands at you. How can you drift off at a time?" Chen Ping'an apologized and asked, "You're destined to become an immortal in the mountains who can enjoy a long lifespan, while Miss Xingzi is a mortal human from outside the mountains. Have you considered this before? Ordinary women will start to gray at 40, and they'll perhaps already be white-haired old ladies at the age of 60. At that time, how will Miss Xingzi face you? Someone who's perhaps still walking around with a youthful experience of just 20 years old." Pang Lanqi felt his heart tighten, and he murmured in response, "I can purposely adhere to nature and age like mortal humans, not freezing my appearance and also becoming a white-haired old man." "You're wrong and wrong again," Chen Ping'an said with a shake of his head. Pang Lanqi looked up with a dumbfounded expression. Let's ignore the fact that you'll still have a divine aura within and a luscious glow over your skin even if you have the appearance of an old man at that time, Chen Ping'an said. After pausing for a moment, Chen Ping'an asked in a quiet voice, "Have you ever put yourself in Miss Xingzi's shoes and thought carefully about what she wants? When it comes to certain matters, you might have very good intentions and act from a place of kindness, but will your actions truly lead to positive results? Are your actions necessarily correct? Have you ever considered the fact that showing other people true kindness isn't simply about what you, or what we want?" Peng Lanqi wanted to say something, but he couldn't help but hesitate. "Back at Mural City, I was only a fleeting guest in your lives," Chen Ping'an continued slowly. "Since she told you to run out of the shop to chase after me and warn me to be careful, just her kindness alone means that she's a good person who most certainly deserves your feelings. Follow current novels on novel.ir.net. I observed the two of you at the shop, and as an observer, I could roughly tell that Miss Xingzi is someone with great attention to detail yet also very open-minded. This is extremely rare. Because of this, she won't feel ashamed when interacting with you simply because you're a lofty immortal from the Flax Robe sect, while she's only a small merchant from outside the mountains. Do you understand just how rare this mentality is? Do you understand just how good it is?" Chen Ping'an shook his head and answered, "You don't know." Peng Lanqi was dazed and speechless, with his lips moving slightly. "In other words, it's actually Miss Xingzi who's been looking after your feelings all these years, hoping that you can focus on cultivation and ascend to greater heights on the mountain," Chen Ping'an revealed. "If my guess is correct, she definitely didn't show too much reluctance when parting ways with you after those rare times that you left the mountain to help out in her shop. However, you would feel slightly gloomy afterward, worried that she didn't like you as much as you liked her. Am I correct?" The rims of Peng Lanqi's eyes became slightly red as he pursed his lips tightly. Chen Ping'an sighed and retrieved a pot of wine. This wasn't immortal wine, and it was his hometown rice wine that was exported from Dragon Spring Prefecture all the way to places as far as the capital of the Great Li Empire. Chen Ping'an took a sip and asked, "You've never sat down and truly considered her feelings, and you've instead always acted according to your own beliefs. Is this really okay?" Peng Lanqi shook his head and replied, "No, it's completely not okay. Which brings me to the last point," Chen Ping'an continued. "Now that the fated opportunities linked to the murals of the heavenly officials in Mural City are gone, it's possible that Miss Xingzi's shop won't be able to survive for much longer. Perhaps you only view this as a minor matter, because this is indeed a minor matter for a cultivator like you. This is only a shop in the market, so how many lesser heat coins can it earn or lose in a single year? Meanwhile, how many immortal coins can you, Peng Lanqi, obtain from the ancestral hall of the Flax Robe sect each year? However, you're completely unaware of just how significant this is to a young woman in the mortal world, to coincidentally own a shop at the foot of the Flax Robe sect. After losing this business, will this not be a disastrous outcome for Miss Xingzi, even if she's able to relocate her shop to the market of Helpless Pass or someplace else?" Chen Ping'an took another sip of wine, with his voice gentle and rich and his words as mellow as fine wine. "The considerations of young women are perhaps always more far-sighted than the considerations of young men at the same age," he said slowly. "How should I put this? The difference between the two can be characterized. The thoughts of a young man are analogous to climbing up a mountain and only looking up, while the thoughts of a young woman are analogous to a small and winding river flowing into the distance." Peng Lanqi scrunched up his face, and it was unknown what kind of sad image had appeared in his mind. Just the thought of this caused the initially happy and carefree young man to have tears brimming in his eyes. Chen Ping'an sighed softly as he glanced at Peng Lanqi. Even Lu Laocheng, the island master of Palace Willow Island who had an extremely strong Dao heart and a seemingly cold-hearted personality, had once tripped over and suffered greatly because of love. Chen Ping'an suddenly smiled and said, "What are you afraid of? Since you understand a bit more now, you can naturally do better in the future and consider Miss Xingzi's feelings a bit more. If you're truly unable to do this and feel like you're not good at understanding the thoughts of young women, then I can also teach you the simplest and dumbest trick in the book. Don't feel embarrassed to speak your mind to her. When it comes to the face and dignity of men, we strive to not lose them a single time when interacting with the outside world. However, there's no need to always appear so tough in front of the person whom you love. Peng Lanqi nodded and wiped his eyes, with a dazzling smile stretching across his face as he asked, "How do you know so much, Qian Pingan?" He was a cultivator, after all, so everything immediately became clear once Qian Pingan revealed the root of the problem. Peng Lanqi's mind once again became pure and limpid. Qian Pingan raised the wine pot in his hand and swirled it around, replying, "Because I travel through the cultivation world and because I drink wine." "Does wine really taste that good?" Peng Lanqi asked in curiosity. Qian Pingan didn't say anything, and he simply responded by drinking wine. He continued to patiently wait for news from malicious Ghost Valley. In reality, there were some things that Qian Pingan could have explained to Peng Lanqi more clearly. However, once he delved into the details and started to discuss the fundamental concepts, it was possible that what he said would pertain to the Great Tao. This was a huge taboo for cultivators in the mountains, so Qian Pingan naturally wouldn't overstep this boundary. Moreover, the romantic feelings between young men and young women remaining slightly naive and muddle-headed was actually a beautiful thing. As such, there was no reason for Qian Pingan to shatter this beautiful innocence and pedantically pore over the details. Peng Lanqi bade farewell and walked away, saying that he would definitely obtain at least 2 sets of yellow paper mural replicas for Qian Pingan. Qian Pingan simply needed to sit tight and wait for the good news. Qian Pingan suddenly called out to Peng Lanqi just as the young man was about to exit the courtyard, saying with a smile, "I forgot to say that there's one more thing you should keep in mind. If you genuinely feel like what I said just now is reasonable, then you should still ponder over things a bit more when you act according to these principles. It's not necessarily the case that reasonable-sounding principles are 100% suitable for you." Peng Lanqi waved his hand and chuckled in reply, "I'm not truly stupid beyond saving, so rest assured that I'll definitely ponder over things by myself." Afterward, Qian Pingan stood up and walked in circles around the stone table, practicing the 6-step walking meditation. When evening arrived, Qian Pingan stopped practicing the fist stance and turned around to look back. A figure flew over on the wind, arriving from the direction where the colossal skeleton Tao manifestation and the golden-armored deity had appeared several days ago. When an earth immortal didn't purposely conceal their aura, there would often be the sound of booming thunder as they rode on the wind and flew through the skies. There would be huge commotion. However, one could soar through the skies silently once advancing to the upper 5 tiers and integrating with the Tao of heaven and earth. In fact, one could even come close to eliminating the ripples of their aura. The figure surging toward Wood Garment Mountain was most likely sect leader Zhu Quan, an unpolished jade-tier cultivator, yet she still caused a huge commotion as she traveled through the sky. Either she was purposely showing off her might to deter the restless forces lying and hiding at Skeleton Shoal, or she had legitimately suffered severe wounds when fighting against City Lord Gao Chong in malicious Ghost Valley, causing her cultivation base to become unstable. After dashing into the territory of Wood Garment Mountain, the figure suddenly ground to a halt before shooting toward the immortal residence located at the waist of the mountain like an arrow. Chaotic astral wind swept through the small courtyard, causing Qian Pingan's large sleeves to flutter loudly. The visitor was none other than sect leader Zhu Quan, the unpolished jade-tier cultivator who cultivated in a thatched cottage near Green Cottage Town. Qian Pingan cupped his fists and said, "Thank you for your assistance, sect leader Zhu." Zhu Quan waved her hand and sat beside the stone table. When she saw the wine pot on the table, she gestured at it and said, "If you're truly sincere about thanking me, then hurry up and treat me to a pot of wine to satisfy my craving." Sitting opposite her, Qian Pingan retrieved a pot of rice wine and explained, "This is just rice wine from my hometown, not immortal wine from the mountains." Zhu Quan cracked open the clay seal and tilted her head back, drinking a large swig of wine. She then wiped her mouth and commented, "It is slightly blander than I like, but it's at least wine instead of water." She glanced at the young man who was quietly sitting opposite her and asked, "Are you very close with Skeleton Poo? I never observed your travels through malicious Ghost Valley, not even when you were barging her in there with Yang Ningxing, so I'm not clear about how you're capable enough to have Skeleton Poo draw his sword for your sake." Qian Pingan shook his head and replied, "I don't have a close relationship with him. To be more precise, I even had some conflicts with him. A fight erupted between me and the female ghosts from Meticulous Skin City, and it was Pu Rang who stopped me from hunting down Fan Yun Luo. Afterward, he actively looked for me one time, and I asked him why he didn't covet the sword on my back when I saw him wearing an azure robe and carrying a sword. Zhu Quan drank quite a lot of the rice wine even though she called it bland, and it wasn't long before she reached the bottom of the pot. She forcefully slammed the wine pot on the table and asked, "And how did Skeleton Poo respond?" Chen Ping'an smiled and didn't say anything. "Oh, are these two truly peas from the same pot?" Zhu Quan thought to herself. "What, you're both dressed in azure and using a sword so you feel like you're on top of the world." However, Zhu Quan glanced at the empty wine pot and let the matter slide. She had already drunk Chen Ping'an's wine, so it was better for her to be more polite toward him. In any case, compared to the pile of dog shit that was Zhang Shangzhen, any other man from the outside world appeared as beautiful and good as a blooming flower. Moreover, the young man in front of her had directly introduced himself as Chen Ping'an from the Great Li Empire's Cloud Drape Mountain before, and Zhu Quan had been relatively happy with their transaction. Zhu Quan had naturally heard of Cloud Drape Mountain before, and she had even heard about Wei Bo, the formal god of the Great Li Empire's northern mountains, several times. This was inevitable, as the Flax Robe sect relied on their intercontinental ship to make money in the other continents of the majestic world. At the same time, she also believed the second sentence that Chen Ping'an had said to her back then. The young man said that he owned a 50% stake in Oxhorn Mountain's immortal ferry station, so he promised that the intercontinental ship of the Flax Robe sect wouldn't need to pay a single snowflake coin for docking there for the next 500 years. Zhu Quan saw this as a long-term transaction where she didn't need to spend a single copper coin, so it was only natural that she definitely accepted Chen Ping'an's offer. If news of this spread, who would dare to say that she was an incompetent and wasteful sect leader? However, Zhu Quan still felt slightly unhappy since Chen Ping'an appeared far too similar to Skeleton Poo, her biggest opponent. She smiled and said, "You actually didn't need to do this. You didn't need to offer me anything, and to say nothing of Skeleton Wall City, I would have stepped forward to stop any of those skeletons that I dislike as long as it was targeting the north. Are you feeling regret now? Is your little heart trembling in grief?" Chen Ping'an smiled faintly and replied, "Sect leader Zhu is heroic and righteous, and this represents the grand demeanor of a large sect like the Flax Robe sect. However, I'm only a guest and a junior, so I can't act in a stingy manner and try to take advantage of you or your sect. I still need to adhere to the proper etiquette." Zhu Quan rubbed her chin and commented, "What you're saying is good, but why does this sound so grating to the ear?" Chen Ping'an retrieved another pot of wine. Zhu Quan nodded and said with a smile, "Your words might be grating to the ear, but you appear much more pleasing to the eye now." Chen Ping'an grabbed his pot of unfinished rice wine and started to drink slowly. Zhu Quan glanced at his slow manner of drinking and shook her head. He appeared unpleasant to the eye again. After finishing the second pot of rice wine, Zhu Quan placed the empty wine pot on the table and said, "There's no need to offer me any more wine. Skeleton Poo has genuinely angered Skeleton Wall City this time, so he'll certainly be made to suffer for the next while," Zhu Quan continued. "However, Skeleton Poo has never cared about these things, and Gao Cheng has always been annoyed at him anyway. They can go all out and fight with their full strength. In that case, Gao Cheng can genuinely kill Skeleton Poo, but Skeleton Wall City will also suffer some fundamental damage. Gao Cheng has genuinely lost all of his face this time, first failing to kill you and then being held back for a long time by criminal Zhang's crappy net. Guess what happened after Gao Cheng retreated back to malicious Ghost Valley? He was reluctant to destroy the crappy net that was essentially made out of snowflake coins, so he could only pinch his nose and retrieve the net. Haha, perhaps Gao Cheng was accustomed to being this thrifty before making a name for himself at Skeleton Shoal, but who would have thought that he would need to act the same way after gaining wide renown in the region? As a big pervert with a black heart, Zhang Shangzhen actually managed to do something good for once in his life. Zhu Quan found this extremely satisfying, so she roared with laughter and naturally extended her hand toward Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an sighed in his mind and placed the third pot of rice wine on the table.